Chapter 434. Lu Xiaoyi thought for a long time in this universe space. He was judging his situation. Escape, he couldn't do it. Communication, it wasn't willing. This was a disguised house arrest. The problem was time? Was the house arrest eternal? Or was there a time limit? He didn't know. But the biggest possibility was when the little peacock Ming Yin would wake up. There was something fishy about this. He didn't believe that the peacock plume didn't know what he did. What was the reason for doing this, even though it knew? It was beyond his scope of understanding. The only thing he could do now was to cultivate. He would persevere until the day the little peacock woke up and see if there were any changes. This time wouldn't be short. To a quasi-holy beast, a few decades was like a few dozen days to a human. The little peacock could sleep for a few hundred years without a problem, but he, Lu Xiaoyi, would probably become a pile of bones by then. This wasn't something he should be thinking about. The more he thought about it, the more sullen he felt. He had nowhere to vent. In helplessness, resignation was a very rare quality. The key was to set a goal, such as how to turn the peacock plume into ashes when he got out one day, and so on. Then he would be satisfied in his fantasy, start to be normal in his satisfaction, and focus on cultivation in his normal state. This was deceiving oneself and others. Deceiving oneself and others was also a kind of attitude towards life. At least it would prevent you from going crazy. Just like the universe void he was in now. It wasn't a normal space that he was familiar with, but how should he say, a different dimension? Mutation? Distortion? His pitiful knowledge of space couldn't explain this predicament, but he was very sure of one thing. He was still within the protection of the peacock plume. Otherwise, no matter what kind of universe void it was, a small foundation establishment like him would die if he went out. If he had to describe it, he was inside an infinitely large bubble created by the peacock plume. This bubble was in a strange, different dimension void. This could ensure that a small ant like him wouldn't die. What was the meaning of such a punishment? Since he couldn't resist, he could only work hard to cultivate. He also understood that the hope of getting out didn't lie in his cultivation realm. Even if he could form his core here, he would still be an ant. Even if he formed his nascent soul, he would still be an ant. The conditions for getting out were completely uncontrollable. Cultivating was just a pastime, and forget his worries. When he started cultivating, he immediately discovered two problems. One was that group of chasers showing signs of activity. Although it wasn't obvious yet, it was an exciting start. It meant that he could slowly unravel the secrets of the clusters of providence on the active level. And it also meant that he could begin to try the mysterious flying sword. What surprised him the most was that the star system here gave him a different cultivation experience. Moreover, he had experienced this before. That was what he had experienced when the floating raft underwent a space jump when he was swept back to the fifth ring. In other words, this so-called alternate space was not that different. It was located in the void of the universe that humans could reach. Lu Xiaoyi gained a lot from that experience, which lasted less than a year. His mental power improved by leaps and bounds in the alternate space. It was as if there were two universes, one positive and one negative. He had been cultivating in the positive universe, and his progress was limited. Furthermore, there were deviations in his mental power. However, in a negative universe, all of this could be corrected. This was absolutely good news. No small foundation establishment cultivator would ever get such an opportunity. He could perfect his own cultivation system here and strengthen himself through the mutual complementation of the two universes. Even he wasn't sure to what extent he could reach. This was a good thing, an extremely good thing. Lu Xiaoyi finally realized a possibility. The peacock plume might not have brought him here to punish him, but to fulfill his wish. Was it because of the selfless help to the little peacock? Very likely. He couldn't find any other reason. This discovery filled him with hope, because leaving was no longer uncertain. After he fixed the flaws in his cultivation here, it would probably be time to leave, right? Since it was a good thing, why didn't it say anything? Was it disdain? Was it shyness? Or was it that, to the peacock plume, such a reward was not even worth mentioning? If the peacock plume didn't say anything, he would never know the truth of the matter. However, at the very least, he was now more relaxed. To determine whether a person or a realm spirit had good intentions, the details were enough. Such a place had almost solved two of Lu Xiaoyi's biggest difficulties in cultivation. If he only attributed it to luck, he would be deceiving himself. Obviously, the peacock plume had seen through this little swordsman's weakness in cultivation and then brought him to the negative space. This was the general direction, but there were still a few small questions that he couldn't figure out. How did the peacock plume solve the fate cluster? Was it because of his kindness towards little peacock that he got all of this? The principle made sense, but it seemed to be making a mountain out of a molehill. Lu Xiaoyi began his cultivation in this space. When he realized that there was hope, when he realized that he would be able to break free from his predicament in the future, even if he was in a bottle, it didn't seem so unacceptable anymore. He was starting from the beginning. The Big Dipper scripture started from the beginning. He couldn't find the Big Dipper here, so he might as well start from the brightest star in the star field, and then gradually sense the other stars. Taoist techniques were indeed very broad. In an unfamiliar star field without the Big Dipper, he could still use his techniques freely. The principle was that as long as there were stars, he could sense them, and it didn't necessarily have to be the Big Dipper. This understanding allowed him to take a crucial step in pure theory, and he began to break free from the shackles of the Big Dipper. If he were to talk about techniques now, using the Big Dipper would no longer be appropriate. Using the constellation scripture would be more appropriate. Everything related to the stars started anew, including the purple star body, starlight guidance, stargazing phenomena, even the Big Dipper flying sword that he couldn't cultivate a sword spirit. If the universe was a piece of paper, then after decades of looking at it from the front, he began to look at it from the back. This had a profound impact on him. So profound that he actually couldn't feel any abnormalities. He just intuitively knew that doing this was very beneficial, very beneficial. Cultivation had no concept of time, especially when he was in such an environment. Time seemed to be superfluous. Lu Xiaoyi felt that 20 years had passed, and only in this starry sky environment did he improve his abilities in all aspects to his original level. In other words, what he repeated in these 20 years was only the level that he achieved in the 50 years of cultivation since he built his foundation outside. It was very inefficient, but he was not discouraged, because he felt that his hidden worries in all aspects were gradually disappearing, especially in the aspect of spirit, which was as solid as gold and stone, perfect and flawless. This was different from the previous time when he only had a strong spirit. It was more condensed and harmonious, as if this spirit was not cultivated, but innate, perfectly compatible with the body. Chapter 435. P.S. The ice guest is about to reach another league. Here is an update for Laozi. Lu Xiaoyi continued to cultivate. It was useless to think about anything else. Because of his persistence, he reaped rewards. In the next 20 years or so, his cultivation and strength began to improve by leaps and bounds. Perhaps it was because his previous drawbacks had been resolved, or perhaps it was because of his solid foundation, or perhaps it was because of the fusion of the positive and negative laws of the universe. But he found that his progress in all aspects was like sitting on a rocket, out of control. His cultivation base had risen from the initial late stage of foundation establishment to the current great circle of foundation establishment. His spirit was refined and flawless. His body was tempered like steel, and his escape technique was elusive and elusive. All martial arts related to the stars had undergone a complete transformation. This made him wonder if the cultivators of foundation establishment could only alternate between the positive and negative universes to cultivate. How did the cultivators who didn't have such an opportunity manage to cultivate the star system? These things were not mentioned in the external Swordboa Tower. Did they not know? Or could they not do it? Or was there some other reason? Or was there a hidden danger in the construction of the star system? Without the guidance and supervision of the elders of the sect, he embarked on a dangerous path. But now, with the correction of the peacock plume, he was back on the right path. The most obvious thing was that his swordsmanship had improved by leaps and bounds. The few sword spirits surfed the waves in the Bong Lang slope. In the Bong Lang slope, the sword spirits of 4 seasons took the lead and rushed to the 29th level. The sword spirits of Ju City reached the 27th level. The sword spirits of Dark Fragrance reached the 23rd level. The sword spirits of Hua Shun reached the 21st level. The sword spirits of Big Dipper reached the 13th level. The sword spirits of Luck Severing reached the 9th level. Yes, in the few decades he had been here, he had set things right and started to walk the right path in nurturing sword spirits. Because of the mysterious boost from the peacock plume, he had broken through his own limits in terms of stars and mysterious destiny, and had nurtured 2 more sword spirits. The sword spirits of Big Dipper could be the main sword spirits in the future, and the sword spirits of Luck Severing were mysterious trump cards. All of these could not be separated from the help of the peacock plume. In the past few decades, he had already determined the attitude of the peacock race's sacred weapon. Although it did not speak, Lu Xiaoyi could feel it. Now, he wanted to know why. In the past few decades, he had been thinking about getting out of this sealed space day and night. Now, he was living in it leisurely. However, he had already understood the concept of cultivation in the main and reverse universes. He understood that it was not the best choice to continue staying in this place. After making up for his shortcomings, the best cultivation environment for him now was actually to return to his original world, instead of staying here and waiting for an opportunity to form his gold core. That was what he thought, and that was what the peacock plume did. One day, after routine, he felt that his progress had passed the crazy period and had begun to stabilize. Just as he was about to make another 5-year plan for himself, he felt the light in front of him blur and space tremble. When he opened his eyes again, he was already above a vast river. This was the secret water. He returned to the 5th ring and was shaken out by the peacock plume. He bowed deeply towards the boundless night sky and didn't say anything because the peacock plume had used decades to teach him what silence was. It was not accurate to say that there was no time in the mountains. In fact, the mountains could not block a cultivator's perception of the outside world, but the inexplicable space could. However, the inexplicable space could not block the reflection of the soul lamp. Therefore, everyone knew whether a swordsman was still alive or not. Unlike a half-immortal, the soul lamp could burn for thousands of years, even if the person was gone. Just a few years ago, the 2 elders of the Peacock Palace, Yun Yin and Shui Yin, came to the dome for the first time and expressed their apology to the Xianyuan Sword School. Because just a few days ago, the little peacock Ming Yin, who had been in a coma for almost 50 years, finally woke up. The truth was revealed. The Peacock clan could not act alone because this matter more or less affected the relationship between the 2 forces. Although it seemed to be well maintained on the surface, there was a faint crack. If it was not handled properly, even the most solid foundation would collapse because of this. How to handle it? How to deal with it? Both sides needed to make up their minds and act together. However, to be honest, it was only a small foundation establishment cultivator. Even if it was Xuan Yuan's senior apprentice brother, it would only cause a commotion for a few years after the incident. After 10 years, it would be calm and quiet. After that, it would be silent. There were too many major events in the 5th ring. The plundering war outside the 5th ring and the impending arrival of the cultivation star field were the real concerns of the major cultivators. As for the middle and low-level cultivators, there were countless filthy disputes every year. In terms of shamelessness, despicableness, and bloodshed, there were countless more that had no bottom line than Lu Xiaoyi's Peacock Palace incident. Every year, every day it happened. Who would specifically remember an old incident from 50 years ago? The Peacock Palace Elder's visit was not only for the little swordsman who had been wronged, but also for the relationship between the Peacock Palace and Xianyuan. This not needed to be untied. Otherwise, when the 2 sides met, it would always be awkward. What did the 2 sides discuss when they met? No one knew. What was the result? Nothing changed. There was no announcement, no restoration of reputation, and no posthumous award of merit. Only Lu Xiaoyi's name was quietly crossed off from the list of people to be held accountable by the law hall. Yin Bo only noticed all these changes a few months later. He had already entered the top 100 of the Fifth Ring's rankings, but his attention was not on the rankings. He was once competitive, but he was no longer at that age. What he should be thinking about now was how to form his core, not how to pick a general out of a group of dwarves. The angry Yin Bo directly charged into the Thunder Hall and was dragged out by Guang Ming, who happened to be in the hall. Otherwise, who knew what would have happened? Guang Ming was sure that if nothing happened in the Thunder Hall, this brat would definitely go to the Sword Chi Rushing Heaven Pavilion. Martial Uncle, we swordsmen are particular about settling debts and grudges. We are clear about rewards and punishments. Whether the cigarette butt is right or wrong, there has to be an explanation. We can't let it remain ambiguous for decades. If it's his fault, I have no objections to how the sect punishes him. But if it's not his fault, he's still carrying the reputation of coveting the peacock blood. What does this mean? I heard that the little peacock has already woken up. A few months ago, the Peacock Palace elder personally went to the Dome sect to explain this matter. Then, the Law Hall withdrew their investigation of cigarette butt. What does this mean? It means that the truth is out. Why don't they dare to openly announce it? It doesn't matter if it doesn't spread to the Fifth Ring, but at the very least, there has to be a clear explanation within Xinyuan, right? Isn't the sect afraid that doing this will chill the hearts of the disciples who are working outside? Guang Ming was angry and annoyed. He was now Jin Dan and naturally knew more than Yin Bo. The reason why he didn't tell him was because he was afraid of his big mouth. But now, it seemed that he had no choice but to say it. That brat cigarette but had two good friends in the Dome sect. One was Yin Bo in front of him, and the other was Yin Chung from the Outer Sword sect. However, she wasn't in the Dome sect. She had applied to be sent out decades ago. Shut up. What nonsense are you talking about? The sect withdrawing their investigation of cigarette, but means that they acknowledge his innocence in the Peacock Palace. But just because he's innocent in the Peacock Palace doesn't mean he's innocent in other areas. These are two different matters. Chapter 436. What do you mean? Yin Bo was still unconvinced. Guang Ming had no choice but to explain patiently. These were his good brothers when he was in the Foundation establishment realm. He had only been in Jin Dan for a few years, so he couldn't put on the airs of a Jin Dan martial uncle. I also heard from senior apprentice brother Guang, Yao, that the people from Peacock Palace have indeed come because of junior apprentice brother Cigarette Stub. At that time in the Peacock Plume, what little he said was the truth. That thief Tumu coveted the peacock blood and was disloyal, so he deceived the inexperienced little peacock. Little Peacock fell for his evil trick and took the initiative to extract the peacock blood. Little Yi's eyes were sharp, so he saw everything clearly from the side. So when the peacock blood appeared, in order to protect the friendship between Xianyuan and Peacock Palace, he immediately attacked with his sword to stop him. As a result, he died and his blood collapsed. Based on this point, not only was little Inan in the wrong, he was also indebted to Peacock Palace, or at least Yin Bo redressing his name was a matter of course, so there was no need to worry too much. But there were two things that made it difficult for martial uncles to reveal the truth to the world now. In fact, it didn't matter whether it was revealed or not. Who would remember the past of a mere Foundation establishment realm cultivator? Not to mention him, even if a Jin Dan like me stole the peacock blood, it would only be a few years before it would naturally disappear. Yin Bo disagreed. Senior martial brother, this has nothing to do with the level of cultivation, right? The key is right and wrong. Right is right. Wrong is wrong. You can't ignore it just because he's a mere Foundation establishment realm cultivator. In Xianyuan, even little, he doesn't know him. What he did was right, so he can't be perfunctory. This isn't just for him, but also for the tens of thousands of Foundation establishment cultivators in Xianyuan. Guang Ming's head hurt. He realized he had said the wrong thing. He had never been good with words, so he was a bit clumsy in front of Yin Bo. Don't pester endlessly. I was just making an example. Do you still want to hear the reason? If you don't, I'll leave and let you do whatever you want. What can you do? Yin Bo didn't say anything, so he could only complain in front of Guang Ming. If he really caused a ruckus in the Thunder Palace, someone would take care of him right then. In Xianyuan, No matter who you were, the decision of the higher-ups was unquestionable. Light sighed. The elders also feel guilty towards little E, but this matter is not simple, because little E does have the peacock blood divine ability. Then, where did his divine ability come from? This was probably the reason why the peacock plume had taken him away alone. Not letting him go for decades was probably also the reason why it was punishing him. Therefore, the elders believed that little E had indeed not done anything wrong in the Peacock Palace, but the process of obtaining the peacock blood divine ability might have been tainted. Before everything is clear, before the meaning of the peacock plume is complete, it is not good for us to come to a conclusion too early. It's not that the sect wants to pursue the matter. Based on our Xuanyuan's habits, this kind of thing happens countless times every year, as long as we don't lose out. But you have to consider the feelings of your allies. The conclusion of two major forces is always changing back and forth. It's too childish, so it's better to wait a little longer. Yin Bo shook his head. How long do we have to wait? Little E is clearly unwilling to say. Light smiled. When the peacock plume releases him, that's when he will speak. The two elders of the Peacock Palace also mentioned that based on little Yi's temperament in the Peacock Palace, he wouldn't have used some kind of vicious method to collect the peacock blood. Therefore, they don't intend to pursue the real reason why little E obtained the peacock blood. As long as the peacock plume releases him, this matter will be written off. This is the first reason. It's not that we don't want to clear things up, but that we have to wait a little longer. Yimbo didn't say anything. From a sect's point of view, this was the right way to go, but from the individual's point of view, it was somewhat sullen. One person should serve the whole. This was the principle. Not only Xianyuan, but every major force was like this. Personal sacrifice came naturally, making it impossible for you to refuse. This was also a kind of influence. In the big chessboard of the cultivation world, who could completely avoid it? He saved when he should, and sacrificed when he should. Thinking of how the sect sent him to save Lu Xiaoyi when he was nothing, Yin Bo's head was full of complaints. But he couldn't say anything. Seeing that Yin Bo had finally become obedient, Light poked him. Your bad temper makes it easy to spoil things. The sect is playing a big game of chess in the middle and lower levels recently. They've been preparing for more than 10 years. I can't tell you the details, but this includes Tian Xingjian. Therefore, before we take action, we shouldn't provoke them too much. Little Yi's soul lamp is fine, but if Tian Xingjian is blamed for the death of his disciple a few decades later, he'll go berserk. It won't do any good. This is the second reason I want to talk about. So, do you still want to overturn the Thunder Palace and challenge the Soaring Heaven Pavilion? Yin Bo smiled awkwardly. All right, I believe you, senior brother. But if there's really any action, senior brother can't forget about me. Light nodded. Don't worry, you can't hide even if you want to. But before that, shouldn't you improve your swordsmanship? I know you're all starting to prepare for the formation of your gold core. This is a big matter and can't be delayed. But under such a big matter, shouldn't you pay attention to some small matters? The current state of the 5-ring ranking is the worst result of our Xuanyuan's inner sword in the past 10,000 years. Don't you feel guilty at all? When Light said this, Yin Bo immediately turned into a frosted eggplant. He had nothing to say. This was indeed what he, and this generation's inner sword, felt ashamed of. In the past 100 years, after the swordsman of this generation formed his gold core in the glorious Light era, there were no other rising stars in the inner sword who could advance into the top 10 of the 5-ring foundation establishment ranking. A few decades ago, Xuanyuan's inner sword had 8 positions in the top 100. Now, there were still 8, but none of them were in the top 10. There were only 3 in the top 30, and they were all old swordsmen who could form their gold core at any time. The newcomers were all hovering in the top 10, and there was no sign of improvement. This was very rare in the history of Xuanyuan's inner sword. Of course, the situation of the outer sword was even worse, but they were already very bad, so now they couldn't be any worse. This was because Lu Xiaoyi firmly occupied the 11th position, which was actually better than the previous record. This was the reason why Light was dissatisfied. And in fact, it was also the reason why many elders of the inner sword were dissatisfied. Since when did Xianyuan need an external swordsman to be the face of the outside world. To the proud inner sword, this was simply intolerable. In the five ring, there were no special competitions to determine the ranking of the cultivators. For example, there were arenas or special competitions. This was too artificial and not in line with the true meaning of cultivation. Cultivators often relied on more random opportunities to express themselves, such as a certain fated spiritual assembly, a certain action, a certain conflict, or a personal grudge. Unless you dared to guard the fish-leaping cliff alone for 10 years and accept the challenge of all the heroes in the world. But that was no longer about fighting for the top 10, but about conquering the world. No one dared to do so. This wasn't something that could be done with just a little bit of strength, but with overwhelming strength. Since the establishment of the ranking for tens of thousands of years, the number of people who dared to do this could be counted with one's fingers. For the past few decades, the inner sword cultivators had encountered this kind of predicament. It was also because of their strength and also because of their opportunities. They didn't display the swordsman's superior fighting ability. In fact, the difference in strength between the top 30 was very close, and there wasn't a fundamental difference. Chapter 4:37. Yinbo calmed down after his impulsive actions. He was no longer the reckless cultivator who walked down the wrong path. He was now a peak foundation building cultivator who was preparing to form his gold core. His thinking was more mature. He recorded everything Light said in a talisman and sent it out. In the dome, Lu Xiaoyi didn't have many real friends. He was one of them, and the other was Yin Chong, who had been out for decades. She didn't know about these changes, so he needed to give her accurate information. This woman was always tough. She went out to guard alone to express some dissatisfaction. She didn't want to stay in the dome and listen to the gossip. With her temper, she had fought with people many times in the years after Lu Xiaoyi's accident. It's good that she went out. In this world of cultivation, no one really cared about foundation building. This was a world where strength was the only thing that mattered. No one could change that. Mao Point Town, the edge of Xuanyuan's territory near the Wolf Ridge, was as peaceful as ever. In the past few decades, under the management of the newly arrived cultivators of Xuanyuan Town, the mortal world was in good order, and the cultivation circle was peaceful. It was a rare period of peace in Mao Tip Town, and all of this was due to one person. A person who was far more responsible, careful, and beautiful than the previous guard. On a stone tower on a hill outside the town, Yin Chong looked into the distance. Just a moment ago, she received a message from Yin Bo. Everything in the world was like a dream. For her, who was a direct participant, it was like yesterday. She wasn't surprised at all by Yin Bo's message. She knew it for decades. It wasn't because of any evidence, but because of the deep trust in a person's soul. It was also because of this that she couldn't change other people's minds. She had to come here because this was the only way to return to the dome from the Peacock Palace. This was a subconscious choice. It was not only to avoid the gossip, but also because she needed to cultivate in peace. In terms of age and cultivation, she had reached the stage where she should consider forming her gold core. She understood that fellow. He was sometimes magnanimous, but deep down, he was a wretched person. If he was really released by the peacock plume, there was a high chance that he would be somewhere near the Peacock Palace. Then, he would have to spend several years flying back. However, this fellow would not return to the dome directly. He would definitely sneakily look for someone to confirm the nature of the incident at the Peacock Palace before deciding on his next move. If there was anything against him, she was sure that this guy would find a place to enjoy himself. He would not face everything bravely like a real swordsman. Mao Jiao Town was the first stop on the way to Xuanyuan's territory. There was a Xuanyuan swordsman guarding the town, so it was the best place to gather information. Therefore, she came here to wait. She didn't know why she had to stay here. Was it to show her support? Or was it a secret message? Or a secret interest in this guy? This guy actually possessed the Peacock Blood Divine ability long ago, yet he didn't say a word. This was too outrageous. She also wanted to have this kind of divine ability. After staying in Mao Jiao Town for several decades, She had already fallen in love with this place. It was a little isolated from the rest of the world. She was very curious. Why was it that she hadn't encountered a single challenge in the past few decades? But wherever this guy went, trouble would follow him without stopping. Now, even Yin Bo wasn't willing to work with this guy. She was afraid that she would be tricked one day. However, her cultivation progress had increased by leaps and bounds in this kind of environment. In terms of swordsmanship, she could only be considered average, but in terms of cultivation, she had a different kind of talent. Many obstacles in the eyes of others didn't seem to exist for her. In fact, in terms of cultivation progress, she was even above Yin Bo. Although Yin Bo was already in the top 100 of the 5-Ring Foundation Establishment Battle Strength ranking, she didn't even have the qualifications to be in the top 1,000. In the cultivation world, battle strength and cultivation realm were not completely the same thing. In the end, cultivators cultivated for longevity. No matter how high your battle strength was, once the time limit was up, you would only be a handful of yellow soil. What was the point of being strong in the past? Mao Jiao Town at dusk was exceptionally beautiful. Smoke rose from the chimneys, and under the echo of the distant mountains, it was as if one was in a fairyland. This was a beauty that could only be discovered after a long period of interaction and observation. It wasn't something that could be experienced in a flash. After a day of cultivation, Yin Chung decided to relax herself step by step. Cultivation techniques, supplements, swordsmanship, wielding swords, etc. After a day, she was a little tired. This was an unavoidable situation for foundation establishment cultivators. They were far from reaching the stage where their mental state would be more perfect after diligently cultivating. Every cultivator had a different understanding of rest. Some of them focused on calming their mind, but there were also many people who had their own hobbies. For example, some people liked to sleep, even if it was only for 2 hours. Some liked to read to relieve boredom. Some liked to fiddle with their hobbies. Some liked to drink a cup of wine. Some liked to gather with friends. Some liked to count the spirit stones in their storage rings. Some liked to have deep conversations with their Tao partners. There are all kinds of strange things. There was no fixed number. To be honest, it was a kind of habit, a kind of psychological inertia. It didn't matter whether the effect was good or bad. As long as you liked it, it would have an effect. Yin Cheng's habit was to bathe. This habit wasn't rare, especially among Kuan cultivators. It wasn't that there was any dirt on the body, but rather it was a kind of psychological hint. It was as if bathing could wash away the exhaustion of the body and relax the feeling of being nourished by water. Of course, when it came to bathing, every Kuan cultivator had their own unique secret technique. This kind of secret technique mainly manifested in the nature of the water. Something was added to ensure that the skin around the body would always be as soft as water and as delicate as flowers. For cultivators, this actually belonged to the category of body cultivation. Using cultivation techniques to solve this problem was far more effective than bathing. However, women wouldn't let go of any method that could make them more beautiful. Yin Xing also liked this, but she was soaking in a plain bath. She didn't use any medicine, flower petals, or all kinds of strange things. She just used pure water, and then she relaxed in the water. This was a habit that had been there for hundreds of years. It couldn't be changed. She was also used to thinking about problems in this state, including cultivation and other messy things. She set up a huge bathtub for herself on the top floor of the stone pagoda. Not only could she see the stars in the sky, but she could also see the hazy night sky of Spear Point Town surrounded by clear water. Looking at all of this, any worries would be alleviated. Of course, she didn't have to worry about being exposed. There was a powerful ceiling array that belonged to Xianyuan. The entire stone pagoda was protected by the array. Especially when she was bathing, the focus of the protection would be shifted to the top floor. This was also one of the few places where she used public tools for private purposes. It was the same today. As usual, Yin Chung lay in the bathtub, listened to the sound of the wind, looked at the stars, and thought. Then she sensed something strange. She was peeping. Chapter 438. Smokey was shocked. She was about to put on her clothes. Her flying sword was already vibrating in the sword case, ready to shoot out at any time. This was just an instinctive reaction for a moment, but then she relaxed again. This was the guardian tower of Xianyuan. Everyone knew about it. Who would dare to peep here? Who would have such lust? The risk of peeping at a female swordsman bathing and spending a little money to see a pool of beauties bathing in Mao Tip Town was like heaven and earth. Also, how could the stone tower's array be so easy to break? Even if he was also a member of Xianyuan Palace, he would not be able to sneak in without the secret key of the formation. Can you see clearly through the window? Why don't you come closer? Also, I don't want my eyeballs to pop out of their sockets. Yin Tong used the water to wash his body as he spoke slowly. There was no response, no aura, and no fluctuation of spiritual vigor. However, Smokey could no longer feel the peeping, so he had obviously run away. However, she didn't let him go. She didn't draw her sword, but shouted, "Lu Xiaoyi, come back here. Do you think you can escape from peeping in the bathroom just because you ran away?" Smokey put on her clothes and jumped to the top of the stone tower. She looked around, but there wasn't the slightest movement. Then, a fluctuation of spiritual vigor quickly approached from a distance. Its aura was vague, completely subverting the characteristics of a normal Foundation establishment cultivator. At the same time, an inexplicably happy voice sounded. "Senior sister, you miss me so much. We haven't seen each other for dozens of years. Are you well? You and I are connected." Senior sister sensed me as soon as I came. He literally passed by to ask for a bowl of water. Smokey was speechless. This guy ran really fast. He was really thick-skinned. He was peeping just a moment ago, and the next moment, he pretended to come from afar. He didn't have the slightest bit of hesitation, as if nothing had happened. For this kind of person, even if you caught him in the act, he would still be full of excuses. When he came closer, Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. "Senior sister, your clothes are really cool," Smokey said angrily. "Cool? I'm afraid you think I'm wearing too much, right? Do you want me to make the windows bigger so that you can come and go more easily?" Lu Xiaoyi said innocently, "Senior sister, I didn't mean it. Originally, I just wanted to come here to get some information. Xianyuan has tens of thousands of external swords, but less than 10% of them are female cultivators. Most of them are still active in the Mountain Gate. Who knew that Senior Marshal's sister would come here?" Smokey was speechless. Just as she had expected, this guy was sneaking around like a thief. "Since you were so selfless, why do you have to be so sneaky? You snuck in just because you're familiar with the formation. Those who know would think that you're here to scout for information, but those who don't know would think that you're a lecher." The two of them entered the stone pagoda. Yin Cheng wanted to change his clothes before setting up a tea table. Smokey was very curious. "Little E, when did you come out of the Peacock Plume? Does the Peacock Palace know about this?" Lu Xiaoyi said, "I came out of the Peacock space a year and a half ago. When I came out, I was above the secret waters. There was still some distance from the Peacock Palace. I didn't look for them because I was afraid of trouble, so I found my own way back. I took some detours, otherwise it probably wouldn't have taken so much time. As for whether the Peacock Plume informed them, I don't know. I can't ask." Smokey had waited for him for decades. Her head was full of questions. "Why did the Peacock Plume want to catch you? Is there no explanation?" Little Peacock Ming Yin has already woken up. "It can be said that your innocence has been cleared. There's no reason that the Peacock Plume doesn't know about it. Or is it that you had other things before, such as—" Lu Xiaoyi found that he had come to the wrong place. He came here to ask for information, but he didn't expect that he would be the one being asked. He knew his senior sister's personality. If he didn't satisfy her, he wouldn't be able to escape. "Senior Marshal's sister, if I told you that the Peacock Plume didn't say a word for 50 years, you wouldn't believe me. But it's true. If it's a lie, I'll drink your bathwater. But I didn't miss my cultivation in the Peacock Plume. There were even some benefits. So I don't think the Peacock Plume has any evil intentions towards me. It's just that it's a little lonely and boring. If Senior Marshal's sister and your bathtub were in there, it would be much more interesting." Smokey knew him very well. She knew that when this person said crazy things, it must be because he wanted to hide something. She couldn't be angry at this time. If she was angry, she would fall into his trap. She had to pursue him relentlessly. Wait, you haven't answered my last question. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't resist and sighed. Senior Marshal's sister, look at you. You're already so old, but your curiosity is still so strong. I can't say. I really can't say. When I was in the peacock plume space, I didn't say anything in front of so many upper-level cultivators because it involved a third party. But I promise you, Senior Marshal's sister, if I can say it one day, I'll be the first to tell you and satisfy your request for gossip. But there's one thing. Although I got the peacock blood supernatural power, I didn't force or scheme during the process. I was willing to do it. I've always been upright, selfless, and magnanimous. I didn't lose out to the secret room. Why would I do such a thing? Smokey curled her lips. Magnanimous? Didn't lose out to the secret room? Just a moment ago, he was peeking at her bathing. The questions she had been holding back for decades were actually centered on two aspects. First, the purpose of the peacock plume. Second, where did the peacock blood's supernatural power come from? In the end, one of these questions didn't answer, and the other couldn't be answered. Instead, it left her countless questions without an opening. She was very suspicious. For 50 years, the peacock plume didn't say a word, didn't do anything. Lu Xiaoyi was very honest. I did something. When I was really bored in the space, I took a bath. In the end, it splashed my face, smoky vented her anger. You deserved it. It should have cut you. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Senior sister, this is also something I've always been curious about. You said that an existence like the peacock plume should at least be at the peak of monarch stage, right? Why didn't it say a word from the beginning to the end? Everything had to be done by yourself, thought by yourself, and decided by yourself. Did it not want to? Did not want to? Or couldn't? Senior sister, you've read a lot of books and are knowledgeable about these things. What do you think the reason could be? Smokey saw that he had finally returned to normal. She was indeed interested in this aspect and had heard a lot about it. She thought for a while. In a situation like this, there's usually only one reason, which is that it doesn't want to be involved in karma. You don't know that when they reach their realm, the way they think about problems is not the same as ours. They also come into contact with the most secretive and sinister aspects of the cultivation world. They attach great importance to karma. Pulling you into the peacock plume space was at the request of the peacock race, so there's no karma. But if it says something, does something, or teaches you something inside, there will definitely be karma. In my opinion, there are only two possibilities. It doesn't want to be involved in your karma, or it feels that you don't have the ability to bear its karma. Considering the great karma that a mere foundation establishment like you can bring, it definitely doesn't want you to be involved in its karma. From this point of view, it's indeed for your own good that it doesn't communicate with you. Chapter 439. The two of them said their goodbyes on the stone pagoda. Lu Xiaoyi finally knew what had happened in the dome during the 50 years he hadn't been in Xianyuan, as well as the aftermath of the Peacock Palace incident. To tell the truth, he was very satisfied. Yanqing knew what he was thinking. Are you very satisfied? You don't have to be the eldest senior brother anymore. You can go out freely and have fun without having to take on any responsibilities. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to deny it, but he couldn't hold back his laughter. In front of this senior sister, he didn't need to hide anything. Nothing could make him happier than this news. He wasn't cut out to be the eldest senior brother. He was extremely repulsed by it. In terms of strength alone, 50 years ago, he was already the eldest senior brother of the Xianyuan Foundation establishment cultivators, so there was no need to mention him now. Although everyone was improving, no one had improved as much as he had. But this didn't mean that he liked being the eldest senior brother. Some people might say that this kind of mentality meant that he didn't have any responsibilities, but he didn't care. He didn't like giving orders, ordering people around, leading people, and responding to a single call. He liked to live his own simple life, doing what he needed to do, taking on the dangers and running errands. He was free and unfettered in this world. This was the cultivation life he truly yearned for. As for being wronged, Bright Snow, what's the big deal? Personal reputation was worthless in front of the sect's interests and the general trend of cultivation. He understood this principle. If one's strength didn't reach a certain level, one shouldn't think about absolute fairness. Sometimes, unfairness could also bring benefits. For example, he had been taken to the fifth ring. Were there more benefits or disadvantages? For example, he had been misunderstood and taken into the peacock plume space. Only he knew what he had gained. If everyone had believed him back then, there wouldn't have been a request for the peacock plume's help. Naturally, there wouldn't have been any of this later. And then, the problem of his cultivation still couldn't be solved. Reverse the universe's space? Dream on. Fortune and misfortune came hand in hand. If each misfortune could bring a different blessing, then Lu Xiaoyi might not be able to withstand each misfortune without dying. It was best to quit while he was ahead. Who's the current eldest senior brother? Lu Xiaoyi needed to figure out. Smoky sighed. In fact, she didn't want Lu Xiaoyi to be the eldest senior brother, but it was selfish. The ordinary Lu Xiaoyi made her feel closer to him. Since her friend was unhappy, why must she force him to do something he didn't like? Right now, the Foundation Establishment cultivator leading the Dome Peak is senior brother Guang Hua of the Inner Sword. However, the Outer Sword is still led by his second senior brother and the others. Recently, there haven't been any outstanding newcomers, nor are there any freaks. I reckon that if you go back, senior brother Guang Hua's position won't change. But in the Outer Sword sect, although you don't have the title of eldest senior brother, you definitely have the strength of eldest senior brother. This can't be run away. The scene of the battle between the Outer Sword sect and the Outer Sword sect is not something that can be easily forgotten. Most importantly, you've always firmly occupied the 11th position in the 5-ring Foundation establishment ranking. Even the Outer Sword is proud of you. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. He knew that some things couldn't be done just because one wanted to. Where one's strength was, where one's ranking was, one couldn't blend in with the ordinary crowd. Smokey asked with concern, "Are you going back to the Dome Peak now?" Little E, since some things can't be avoided, then there's no need to. Anyway, you're famous for being lazy in the Outer Sword sect. It doesn't matter if you're lazy. Since the sect feels that they owe you and you're no longer the eldest senior brother to outsiders, there shouldn't be so many problems. To be honest, your ability to cause trouble is a headache for many uncle masters. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and said sincerely, "Senior sister, thank you for your concern. You've been waiting for me here for decades. You've even prepared a bathtub. Only now do I have the chance." Smokey's long, shapely eyebrows rose. This person could always make a good meaning sound vulgar. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. "I won't tell others where I'm going, but to senior sister, I have to live up to that breathtaking glance." He nimbly dodged Smokey's fist. "I'm not going back to the Dome Peak. There's no point. My destination is Fish Leaping Cliff. I asked senior sister to keep it a secret for now, including that big mouth of Yinbo's." Smokey stopped punching as she realized something. "You're not going back to the Dome Peak? Fish Leaping Cliff? You're crazy. Don't tell me you're going there thinking. What's the point? What are you trying to prove? You don't want to be the eldest senior brother, but your actions make it so that no one in the Dome Peak would dare to take the eldest senior brother's position. That's not you, Lu Xiaoyi, who's just waiting to die." Lu Xiaoyi sighed. He reached out and took out a broken sword from his storage ring. "Senior sister, do you recognize this?" Of course, Smokey recognized it. "This is senior brother Guang Bei's broken sword." Little EU Lu Xiaoyi nodded. "Yes, this is senior brother Guang Bei's broken sword. You know, senior brother Guang Bei's greatest wish when he was alive was to stab his sword into Fish Leaping Cliff. Now that he's gone, I'll fulfill this wish for him. This was the goal I set for myself at Wolf Ridge. Now, I feel that it's time to fulfill it. Senior sister, you also know that I hate being bound by certain things. But once there's a wish, I'll definitely fulfill it." Smokey looked at him as if she was looking at a monster. "Little E, I also know senior brother Guang Bei's wish, but his wish was to stab his sword into Fish Leaping Cliff. This is an honor that all the top 10 cultivators will have after 10 years. It's not personally going to Fish Leaping Cliff to stab his sword. That's the fundamental difference. If you go now, you can only show one attitude. I'm supreme. There will be countless cultivators coming to challenge you. You can't refuse those on the rankings, those with Dharma meridians, those with physique meridians. These are two completely different things. Do you understand? Even if you have the strength to suppress others, you can't possibly stab your sword into Fish Leaping Cliff for 10 years. Everything about you, your various trump cards in battle, will be seen clearly by others and analyzed clearly. There will definitely be a cultivator who can restrain you. This is too dangerous. Unless it's a Jean Dan standing there accepting the challenge of Foundation establishment, then it's possible to remain undefeated for 10 years. Have you become stupid from reading too many heroic biographies? Those are biographies that have a lot of fiction in them that isn't real. No, I don't agree with you going. Lu Xiaoyi looked at her gently. Senior sister, I'm no longer the Lu Xiaoyi from 50 years ago. The current me is completely different from the past me. Originally, I wanted to use this method to fulfill Senior Brother Guangbei's wish. I only needed to spend 10 years to reach the peak. But there were some troubles in the early stages which caused me to waver on the rankings. This wasn't what I wanted, but now, it's a different matter. As for my trump cards, they don't know. Let me tell you a secret. Actually, my trump cards are spells. Smokey didn't believe him at all. Lu Xiaoyi, I'm talking to you about serious matters. If you insist on going, no one will collect your corpse. Chapter 440. Lu Xiaoyi looked at her quietly, waiting for her to calm down. She was one of the people closest to him, just like his sister. He knew that it was because she cared for him that she had stopped him. What she didn't know was that Lu Xiaoyi, at least among the Foundation establishment cultivators, was no longer a rice worm, but a big worm. When Smokey finally calmed down, he explained, Senior Marshal's sister, we're not young anymore. I'm 130 years old this year, you're 150 years old, and Smokey is 160 years old. We've already walked more than half of the Foundation building path. If we cut off the beginning and end of the last few decades, when our vitality declines, how much time do we have left to struggle? Not much time. Before we start sprinting, we have to deal with all our worries. I only have one thing on my mind, so how can I wait? Don't think I'm courting death. During the 50 years in the peacock plume, I yearned for a better life more than anyone else. But in the cultivation world, you can't wait for a better life, and you can't hide from it. You can only fight for it. Senior Marshal's sister, don't worry about me. If we want to be together for a long time, we have to pass our own test. Senior Marshal's sister, keep this bathtub. When I'm Jean Dan, I'll come back to see Senior Marshal's sister's bathing picture. Smokey already knew she couldn't stop him. This guy's actions were always so unexpected. No need to report to the sect. No need for the sect to send people to protect you. Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. Fish Leap Cliff, the place where all the cultivators in the world focus their attention, has been quiet for a long time. This time, let me, Lu Xiaoyi, add a feast for everyone. Since the feast has begun, why would I need protection? The tens of thousands of cultivators who want to challenge me are all my protectors. He was right. Fish Leap Cliff was a very special place. In addition to the cultivators' mentality, there were some who were treacherous, but most of them were people who wholeheartedly pursued the Tao. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, it was impossible for them to use underhanded methods such as sneak attacks, sieges, and relays. This was a display of strength under the sun. Apart from ability, there was nothing else to rely on. Smokey made a decision. Then I'll go with you. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Senior Marshal's sister, what are you going to do? Fish Leaping Cliff is a one-on-one competition, not a mixed doubles competition. Smokey Ash said angrily, I'm not going to escort you. I can't protect him either, but at the very least, there should be someone to collect the corpse, right? His words were so unpleasant to hear. Lu Xiaoyi was very angry, but since he had already decided, his mood began to relax. Senior sister, I've stayed in the peacock plume space for 50 years, and the food in my storage ring has long been used up. My mouth is so bland that I'm about to vomit. I wonder if Senior Sister has any food here? Let me offer it to the 5 Viscera Temple. I'm not your servant girl, or your kitchen maid. You don't want to be the eldest senior brother, and you don't even want the fawning of countless people. Instead, you just have to come to my place to eat, drink, and enjoy, Yin Jim muttered to himself. Go down and prepare some food for him. He sounded so pitiful, but he didn't want him to suffer too much. The food in the storage ring always tasted bad, so the freshly cooked food would be better. Anyway, it was close to Mao Point Town when Yin Chong returned to the stone tower with a sumptuous banquet prepared by the largest restaurant in Mao Jian Town. He realized that he had lost track of this fellow. He shouted, Lu Xiaoyi, where the hell did you go? If you don't come out, I'll feed this food to the dogs. Lu Xiaoyi's voice came from the top floor. Here, the scenery here is good, and the view is broad. It's a good place to drink wine and admire the moon. A guest doesn't bother two hosts. I'm a little tired here, so I don't want to move. Yin Jie continued to mutter, this dead man, he really thinks he's the boss. However, although she was muttering, she also realized that this fellow's ability to hold his breath was much better than hers, including the incident where he peeked at her bathing and ran away. All these showed that this fellow's ability was really different from before. This was a good thing, at least she would die a slower death. When she reached the top floor, she still didn't see him. She put the food on the table and was about to curse. Although she had a straightforward temper, she had never been in a state where she wanted to curse at the slightest thing like now. Just as she was about to open her mouth, she suddenly felt that something was wrong, and a series of curses followed. Lu Xiaoyi, you actually dared to use my bathwater to bathe. I think you don't want to live anymore. Since you're going to die at Fish Leaping Cliff anyway, you might as well die here. The next day, the two left Mao Zian town and started to fly south. Because they weren't in a rush, they flew leisurely, treating it as their last chance to relax before the battle. Lu Xiaoyi asked, Senior sister, you're just going to leave like this? Don't you need to ask for leave from the sect? Yin Jie snorted. What leave? I've been working hard at Mao Zian town for dozens of years, and I've never once asked for leave. Even if I don't have 10 years of leave, I've at least 7 or 8 years. I'll just treat it as making up for it. Besides, when you start at Fish Leaping Cliff, there will be countless heroes from all over. The swordsmen of 1,000 Virtues Peak will also flock over. When that time comes, how will the visitation hall have the time to care about me? The two of them flew leisurely for several months. They flew out of Xuanyuan's sphere of influence and started to challenge Wolf Ridge. After flying around Wolf Ridge for several more months, as they gradually went deeper into the Wolf Ridge, an abnormality in the settlement of the Alpine tribe caught their attention. They had carried out missions in Wolf Ridge before and were no strangers to the Alpine tribe. Although this tribe wasn't within their area of contact, the miserable state of the settlement still aroused Yin Jie's pity. It wasn't a man-made disaster, but a natural disaster. The continuous heavy snow had sealed off the mountain and cut off their source of livelihood. This wasn't uncommon among the indigenous tribes of Wolf Ridge. Tribes with cultivators were better off, but there were countless tribes of the Alpine tribe. These tribes that lived in the depths of Wolf Ridge didn't have any cultivators. They were also the most miserable of the Alpine tribe. Their elders didn't care about them, and their uncles didn't love them. Humans didn't care about their life and death. Let's go down and take a look. Lu Xiaoyi could see his senior sister's intentions. She was now in the preparation period of forming her Aurus core, and some things related to her state of mind couldn't be ignored. The two of them stayed here for a month. Food was easy to solve, but the key was some diseases. Lu Xiaoyi didn't know anything about them, but Yin Jie did. Thus, the two of them divided the work. Yin Jie was in charge of the specific diseases, and Lu Xiaoyi was in charge of the strange things. Don't underestimate these strange things. In a world of cultivation, some psychological things were also very important. Because everyone believed in this, the Alpine tribe had absolute faith in the gods who could fly in the sky. This was much more useful than the words of their earth priest. Lu Xiaoyi was in charge of this area. He was able to talk nonsense as soon as he opened his mouth. Any unreasonable things could be made up by him. In this way, the two of them had gained a high reputation in this small mountain tribe. Occasionally, when Smoky Chimera had some free time, through interacting with the mountain people, he found that his reputation here was not as good as that unreliable guy's. This made her feel very hurt. She worked so hard day and night to gather herbs and prescriptions, but she couldn't even compare to that guy who used his mouth to fool people. On this day, seeing that most of the Alpine tribe's patients had been treated, she quietly went to another wooden house. She wanted to see how that guy would fool people. Chapter 441. Lu Xiaoyi's place was very lively, unlike the deserted place where she lived. Obviously, in the eyes of the tough villagers, the pain in their arms, legs, and chests were not as important as solving their mental problems. However, Yin Cheng was very curious. How could a tribe without cultivators like them have a problem with their spiritual beliefs? There was no need to deliberately hide. She probably could not escape this guy's perception anyway. Yin Cheng squeezed into the crowd to see how great immortal Lu treated the villagers. A middle-aged villager walked out nervously. Great immortal, I've been feeling that something is wrong these days. It's as if there's a mysterious force controlling me. The strangest thing is that I'm fine at night, but something is wrong during the day. No matter where I go, it's as if something is following me. I feel that my throat is tight, as if an invisible hand is strangling me. The back of my neck is also cold, as if a ghost is blowing on my back. I haven't been eating or sleeping well these days. I've been wondering if I've attracted something unclean or been possessed by something filthy. Please help me take a look. I'll burn incense and pray for your great kindness every day. Yin Cheng heard him and subconsciously used her divine sense to carefully scan the villager's body. However, she could not find anything. This person's body was strong and his mind was not damaged. At most, he was a little dispirited. What kind of strange object was this? Was her level too low to detect it? She could not do anything about it, but she did not know what this guy could do. They were both in the foundation establishment stage and were at the same level. In terms of flying sword ability, she was ashamed of her inferiority. However, it did not make sense that she was inferior to this guy in these aspects. She looked at Lu Xiaoyi again. His posture was perfect. His eyes were half open and half closed, and his tone was like that of a charlatan. Huh, you're wearing your sweater inside out. The sweater was a rough animal skin vest sewn by the villagers with animal fur. It was very effective in protecting against the cold. However, if it was worn inside out, the crowd roared with laughter. The middle-aged man blushed and took off his sweater to change it on the spot. Immediately, his throat was no longer tight, and the cold wind behind his neck was gone. Yin Cheng looked on from the side and found it funny. She also realized that when ghosts and gods spread to the world, many common things in life became the soil of ghosts and gods. This was also a kind of illness. The problem was, how did Lu Xiaoyi find out? Why didn't he think of that? An old woman walked out with her grandson, who was about 10 years old. Exalted immortal, take a look at my grandson and see if you can bring him in for cultivation. It's said that cultivation requires talent. My grandson's talent can be said to be incomparable. Especially in the past half a year, it had become even more obvious. He could bite ghosts. It bites all evil things. It doesn't matter if those evil things are hidden in rocks, tree roots, or something else. As long as my grandson bites hard, he can immediately bite these hidden evil things to death. He will never miss them. With such talent, exalted immortal, do you think it's worth nurturing? Lu Xiaoyi shouted in the direction of the cigarette holder. Give him a prescription to clear away his internal heat. Yin Cheng was still using his divine sense to scan the child's body, but he didn't seem to find anything magical. Why? Lu Xiaoyi felt helpless. This guy's gums are just bleeding. If I use too much strength, he'll... At the end of the month, despite the villagers' pleas for them to stay, the two of them resumed their journey. Noticing that Smoky Deer was a little downcast, Lu Xiaoyi smiled. What's wrong, senior sister? Do you think I've stolen your limelight? You've saved countless people, but you're not as well-loved as me, a pretentious ghost? So you're not too happy? Smoky Deer shook her head. Am I that kind of petty person? I just feel that I have some feelings, but I can't explain why. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. In the cultivation world, of course you have to look at it from the perspective of a cultivator. That's right. But the cultivation world is also a human world. In a human world, no matter how prosperous cultivation is, It's only a part of life, not everything. Senior sister's problem is that you look at everything from the perspective of a cultivator. But what I want to tell you is that the best way to solve the problems of ordinary people's lives is often not through cultivation, but through the bits and pieces of common sense and habits in life. Because of cultivation, we will slowly forget that we were once ordinary people. The higher the realm, the more we forget. Smoky Deer pondered, what if we forget until the end? Lu Xiaoyi pursed his lips. Then we'll become immortals. Smoky Deer was speechless. The cultivation way of thinking was really a very strange thing. No matter what she did, she couldn't help but want to scan it with her divine sense first and use the theory of cultivation to explain everything. But in fact, most of the so-called strange things in the mortal world did not have any cultivation elements in them. As long as one was a little more careful, they would find that it was just a very normal accident in life. Originally, ordinary people could solve it by themselves, but once gods and monsters were involved, they would naturally push the blame to gods and monsters. Little E, what do you mean? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Cultivation is a big driving force for human development. Cultivation is also a big obstacle for human progress. Human wisdom is infinite. In fact, even without cultivation, human beings can still fly in the sky and travel in the void. Forget it. Why am I telling you this? What I mean is that when human beings rely too much on cultivation, it actually limits their normal imagination. The two of them discussed while traveling. Lu Xiaoyi didn't mind sharing some of the ideas of his previous life with senior sister, provided that they weren't too advanced and could be accepted by this world of cultivation. Senior sister was now in the early stage of preparation for the core formation. Not only did she need to prepare her magic power and spirit, but she also needed to stimulate her spiritual ideas to keep her thoughts active and not stagnant water. Of course, the stimulation must be measured. Some things could be said, and some things couldn't be said. If he said too much, it would impact her inherent thinking system, and then it would be as bad as not enough. However, he found that senior sister's ability to accept things was very strong, and her ability to draw inferences about other things was also very strong. Although her spirit was far less powerful than his, it was condensed enough. On the outside, it showed that she was indomitable and unrepentant. Accepting new ideas, thinking, understanding, and getting rid of the impurities was just a primer. This kind of thinking process was actually a process before the core formation. Those with the root of wisdom would have a flash of inspiration during this process, grasping the essence of a certain heavenly Tao and leaping over the dragon gate. Those who were stupid would only hesitate and be in a dilemma during this kind of thinking collision, and in the end, their brains would become a pile of mush. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi didn't have experience in the core formation, but he had read a lot of books in this field. He made the above judgment based on his own ideas, not for specific guidance, but to open up senior sister's thoughts. Hopefully, it would be effective. As for himself, this method wouldn't work. As an old soul, the ideas of two lives were mixed in his mind, and he had long been unable to cause any fluctuations. Chapter 442. The Fishleap Cliff was not in the three regions, but in the depths of the Wolf Ridge. The Peacock Palace was located at the intersection of the Secret Waters and the Wolf Ridge. The Wolf Ridge here was thinner, but the Fishleap Cliff was hidden in the thickest part of the Wolf Ridge. The thickness of several 100,000 li made it extremely difficult for cultivators to enter and exit, especially for Foundation establishment cultivators. Flying here was full of twists and turns. However, with the map in hand and Lu Xiaoyi's precise positioning of the stars, they were not afraid of taking a wrong turn. The two of them were both at the peak of Foundation establishment, so their cultivation was not a problem. Most importantly, they had 5 years of experience in the Wolf Ridge, so they were not unfamiliar with this kind of terrain. This was a long journey that took them 2 whole years. This kind of trip was actually not recommended by the sect, especially for cultivators whose cultivation was not high enough. However, for the two of them, who had already reached the peak of the Foundation establishment realm, their daily cultivation was more focused on comprehending the state of mind, so this kind of trip was suitable. This was also why Lu Xiaoyi agreed to let his senior sister follow him. If he refused, Yin Cheng would have to travel sooner or later. This was an unavoidable process. Instead of that, he might as well bring her along and let her experience the struggle for the top of the 5 rings. It was very beneficial for a cultivator who was in the preparation stage of core formation. Every action of a cultivator had a purpose. Lu Xiaoyi had his reasons for coming here, and Yincheng had her own reasons for following him. It was superficial to say that she was completely swayed by her emotions. It cannot be said that Yin Cheng was doing this just to ride on his coattails. A win-win situation was the best way to get along. They were no longer young, so they could not be as pure as a young man and woman. However, this was still a friendship. As they grew older, their cultivation improved, their horizons broadened, and everything changed, including their friendship. It became more mellow, more tolerant, more altruistic. The flat sky plateau was their final destination. This was a rare flat terrain within the Wolf Ridge. It spanned tens of thousands of kilometers and was vast and boundless. The Fish Leap Cliff stood at the very center of the flat sky plateau. It was several thousand meters tall and stood alone, having experienced the vicissitudes of life. On the first night, they entered the flat sky plateau. Smokey suggested, "Rest for a night. I'll make you dinner. You might not have the chance to eat a hot meal in the next 10 years, or it might even be your last meal." Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. "It's the last dinner. Senior sister, is there anyone who cheers me up like you?" "But I was thinking, other than the big meal, can I take a bath?" "Senior Marshal sister, did you bring that big bathtub with you?" Yin Lei found a suitable place to land, and his words were not polite at all. "I brought it with me, but I've already changed it into a coffin." Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. He knew that senior sister still didn't approve of him showing off his abilities here, but since he was already here, how could he back down? Moreover, in his opinion, such an attempt might not be dangerous. After the big meal, the two of them didn't have any intention of resting. On such a pure plateau, there wasn't even a single cloud. It was as if the stars in the sky were within reach. It had to be said that such an environment was very beneficial for a star system cultivator like Lu Xiaoyi. Even his perception of the stars was stronger than usual. "Senior Marshal's sister, tell me, what kind of place is this Fish Leaping Cliff? What kind of rules are there? I'm still a little unclear." Smokey sighed. She knew that this guy wasn't lying. Sometimes, this guy's schemes were almost to the extreme, but other times, he was carefree and didn't care. She really didn't know how this guy's brain worked. She still had to teach him the most basic of knowledge. The 5 rings have a ranking list, which stops at the yuanying. In other words, there are actually only 2 ranking lists in the 5 rings: the Foundation Establishment ranking and the Jindan ranking. The Jindan ranking doesn't have a tablet. It's only passed down by word of mouth among cultivators. It's a fake ranking. Only the Foundation Establishment ranking is a real ranking. It's what we call the Fish Leaping Cliff. Those who can leave their names on the Fish Leaping Cliff are divided into 2 types: honorable names and illusory names. Honorable names refer to cultivators who rank in the top 10 and maintain their ranking for at least 10 years. Their names will be engraved on the cliff as a memento for eternity. Since the 5 rings had a ranking list, no less than 10,000 cultivators have left their names on the Fish Leaping Cliff. Many of them have now become Jindan, Yuanying, and even true monarchs. Illusory names have a separate stone wall that shows the current Foundation Establishment ranking. For example, you, Smokey, and the others are all on it. However, this image wall changes every 3 years. It records the cultivation changes of 5 Rings Foundation Establishment cultivators, and their strength grows. A cultivator may be on the image wall this time, but it may not be the same 3 years later. If they're on the image wall for several years or dozens of years, if they don't rank in the top 10, they'll ultimately be erased from existence. That's why they're illusory names. They only represent the present, but they can't last forever. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Even if they leave their honorable names on the stone wall, they'll die before they reach Jindan. "I don't know what the meaning of the word honorable is," Smokey retorted. "Not every cultivator can successfully form their gold core. We all know that this is just the luck of a very small number of people. But you can't think that just because they can't form Jean Dan, they don't have the qualifications to shine. Even if it's only for a short time, at least they came, tried their best, and left their names behind. That's also a kind of success, isn't it? Lu Xiaoyi was left speechless. Their standpoints and perspectives were simply different. There was no standard answer. In the history of the Five Rings, there were dozens of foundation establishment cultivators who chose the same method as you. They stabbed their swords into the fish-leaping cliff and challenged the heroes of the world. This was also the fastest way to become famous. It didn't require time or enough suitable occasions for others to judge them. In fact, most of them didn't do it for fame. Rather, after a long period of cultivation, they wanted to challenge themselves. After being silent for 100 years, they suddenly erupted and returned to normal. Almost none of them were originally ranked in the top 10. Those who were on the ranking list didn't care much about their rankings. Those who weren't on the ranking list, on the contrary, had many astonishing achievements. This is the cultivation world, full of strangeness and contradictions. Among these dozens of people, only 5 succeeded and left behind their own legends. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Were there any Xianyuan swordsmen? Smokey shook his head. No, not a single one. Swordsmen aren't suited for this kind of battle environment. We need space, tactics, and surprise. Most importantly, we need to be able to grind. When you stand in front of everyone, your swordsmanship system, combat characteristics, escape technique, speed, physical endurance, mental limits, all sorts of trump cards, and so on will be magnified in countless pairs of eyes, studied and analyzed. In the end, they will find the most effective way to defeat you. Swordsmen can't be grinded. When your characteristics are exposed to the world, a few Dharma cultivators with astonishing strength will target your characteristics and slowly grind away our sharpness. Swordsman's combat strength is strong, but there's a prerequisite for this. If there's a chance, kill. If there's no chance, leave. This is the essence of wielding the sword. But here, where can you go? Chapter 443. P.S. Added to Xiaoyao in advance. It was just a matter of time anyway. Just kidding. The main point was that the chapter should end here. Lu Xiaoyi agreed with Smoky Cigarette's words. In a Xianyuan sword sect, whether it was the inner or outer sword, the spirit of controlling the sword was the core essence. Explode without holding back. Search for a fleeting opportunity to attack during the explosion. If you can't find it, run away immediately and never stay behind. Then wait for the next contact, choose the environment, and choose the opportunity again. The worst situation for a swordsman was to fight a battle of attrition with the opponent. This was actually the rhythm that a spell cultivator was most willing to drag into. Swordsmen's strength was never in terms of cultivation and magical power. Their strength lay in their explosive power and instantaneous output. If they couldn't create an opening, there was not much meaning in fighting. A swordsman would exhaust his magic power much faster than a magic cultivator in a long and drawn-out tug-of-war. At the same time, it would also wear down their spirit and patience. The longer they dragged on, the smaller the chances of them turning the tables. They would then fall into the traps and harassment of magic cultivators in all sorts of ways. Is there a space restriction on Fishleap Peak? This was a very practical question. Smoky Cigarette was speechless. What kind of people were they? They were about to stab their swords on Fishleap Peak, yet they still didn't know such basic knowledge? There is no space. There is no arbitration. Everything depends on your own judgment. If the spectators and the leaderboard maker think that you are too far away, your challenge will be considered a failure. This kind of lack of restrictions was even more troublesome for swordsmen, because swordsmen didn't know how far to control their swords within the permitted range. It was better to have a large space barrier. Xianyuan Nijian's lineage had tried it before. Even if he could kill any Zhuji realm cultivator in a life-and-death battle, he couldn't survive for more than 3 years under the endless targeting here. They could only last for the first 2 years, because those experts were on their way here. You don't know, but they loved it when swordsman was in the limelight. This meant that the spell sect finally had a chance to defeat the swordsman's legend of invincibility. Therefore, as long as you stabbed your sword into the sword vein, the powerful cultivators from the various sects of the Five Rings would swarm over to participate in this grand hunt for the sword vein. This was also the reason why the Thunderbolt Palace later issued a strict order to their subordinates to not allow any swordsman to participate in the sword stabbing at the top of the cliff. Lu Xiaoyi was very surprised. The inner sword doesn't allow it? In that case, external swords were allowed. So I'm not breaking the rules? Smokey smiled bitterly. The external sword sect doesn't have such a rule. It's not because the external sword sect is more open, but because no one in the external sword sect has dared to step onto the stage for tens of thousands of years. If the inner sword sect can't even move, how can they step onto the stage of Five Rings? Since that's the case, why do you need to obediently take off your pants to release air? Lu Xiaoyi began to look forward to it. Could it be that because people think that this person is crazy, no one will dare challenge him? After all, the journey is long and troublesome. Smokey said resolutely, impossible, because you're a swordsman. You were born in Xinyuan. You're the best target for a group of people to attack. Moreover, the ranking also has a rule that if someone stabs a sword, the top 10 cultivators must all step forward to challenge him. Otherwise, they'll automatically lose their ranking after 10 years. Lu Xiaoyi licked his lips. That's good. I thought that the 1,000 people on the ranking would all have to go through it at least once. It's fine for others, but if that guy Yamba comes, should I beat him? Or should I not? Actually, I suddenly thought of a wonderful idea. If I pull a group of people from the dome and change the challenges from the sects of the Five Rings to our Xuanyuan's internal challenges, others won't be able to interfere. Or I can fight Yamba for 10 years. Smokey was speechless and looked at him calmly. Lu Xiaoyi shrugged. All right, Xinyuan can't afford to lose face like this. I was just joking. But if the opponent is a cultivator, what if I waste 10 years with him and then defeat him in the end? Smokey sighed. How stupid would he have to be to cooperate with you like this? Little E, I've always thought that someone who can make such a challenge must be a great hero. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such an imposing aura. But why do you want to sneak in and fish in troubled waters? If you have enough people to deploy, do you still want to send people to intercept the challengers halfway so that you can reap without sowing? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. He was very sincere. Senior apprentice sister is right. I do have such thoughts, but the problem is that I can't afford such expenses. Smokey didn't quite understand him. In fact, even he didn't quite understand himself. Ever since he started cultivating, he had always wavered between fearlessness and wretchedness, wavering unsteadily. He didn't think that this was a problem. Reality wasn't a novel. No one was born wise and brave, steady and decisive, and indomitable. Character was formed by the combination of time, chance, experience, realm, and countless other factors. Perhaps in the future he would become a true swordsman, but right now he wasn't. Moreover, he had never regarded bravely moving forward as a creed in life. If he really did that, how many bumps would he have to knock on his head before he could wake up? Lu Xiaoyi began to check the equipment in his storage ring. Before he started this magnificent undertaking, there were still some preparations to be made. 10 years of sword insertion was not something that could be resolved with a single word. Behind the surge of passion, careful preparations couldn't be ignored. These things biographies wouldn't mention. Books would only talk about how a certain person had leaped to the top of a fish for 10 years, defeating all the heroes in the world, how thrilling, how heroic, how everyone admired, how unhindered. But biographies wouldn't mention how much spiritual vigor, how much medicine, how many weapons, how much food, and so on were prepared in the storage ring of the hero. Smokey was helping him prepare. You don't have enough magical energy replenishing pills, Lu Xiaoyi explained. I usually use spirit jades to resolve this. And with my fighting habits, even if I use the first 3 axes, when I really need to replenish my magical energy in battle, I'm not far from losing. Smokey stuffed all her pills into his storage ring. It was better than nothing. Who knew what would happen in 10 years? You don't have enough swords either. Don't underestimate other orthodoxies. There are also some people who are strong in close combat, not to mention body cultivators who pride themselves in close combat. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. I'm too lazy to get close to them. A real swordsman is not afraid of close combat, but not blindly. There's no reason for me to give up on the advantage of my flying sword's range. Smokey stuffed a storage ring with dozens of swords into his hands. This was the standard equipment of almost every swordsman. How many swords would be used and destroyed in 10 years? Nobody knew. Smokey was meticulous, like a competent older sister preparing school supplies for her younger brother. Unfortunately, her younger brother was so uncooperative and disliked the hassle. Seeing Smokey fiddling with the storage rings in a daze, Lu Xiaoyi pointed at one of the rings that she never touched. What's in there? Smokey didn't even look up. Your coffin. The sun appeared especially early in the morning on the highlands. The two of them hurried on their journey early in the morning. After noon, a black shadow began to appear in their line of sight. As it flew closer and closer, the fish-leaping wall finally revealed its true appearance. Lu Xiaoyi looked at his senior sister beside him. Senior sister, please wait. I have to walk the rest of the way by myself. We'll meet again in 10 years. After he finished speaking, he didn't wait for her reply. His figure flashed, and he flew away. Chapter 444. Around the fish-leaping wall, there were still some scattered cultivators. Those that could come here were all late or peak foundation establishment powerhouses that had the time to spare. Otherwise, no one would come to visit such a place. For most of them, crossing Wolf Ridge once during their foundation establishment period was a necessary process. It was like a rite of passage exclusive to foundation establishment cultivators. Of course, since they were going to cross, they had to find the thickest part of Wolf Ridge. If they found a place like Spear Point Town where the trade routes were thin, it would be a joke. Thus, Fish Leaping Cliff became the first choice for most cultivators to cross Wolf Ridge. Not only could they train themselves, but they could also visit Fish Leaping Cliff to see the names left behind by their predecessors. It was a pleasure to compare them to their current destinations, whether they had already been buried under the earth or had already become nascent soul monarchs. There were dozens of cultivators who lingered around Fish Leaping Cliff every day. They didn't disturb each other, just like Lu Xiaoyi and Yin Shun. They were also seen as swordsmen who came here to pay respects. However, cultivators were not allowed to do anything to the Fish Leaping Cliff, especially the eastern cliff that was as smooth as a mirror. It was not easy to come here, so they could not leave a mark of someone who had been here for a long time. People would come knocking on his door to challenge him. Moreover, Fish Leaping Cliff had a high-level formation set up by a powerful cultivator. It wasn't something that foundation establishment cultivators could easily destroy. Therefore, they just lingered around the mirror in the east in 2s and 3s, counting the number of people from their sect who had left their names here. It was also a pleasure to talk about the changes in the power structure of the Five Rings cultivators. There were a few Dharma cultivators gathered in front of the ranking. They belonged to different sects, but since they were here, they were still part of the same sect. There were even disciples from the Supreme Three Pure Ones. Speaking of which, the only ones who dared to cross the thickest part of Wolf Ridge at the foundation establishment stage were these big sections. There were far fewer disciples from the smaller sections. The disciples of the Three Pure Ones were very happy when they saw the ranking. These years, it's time for our Dharma vein to prosper. In the top 10 of the ranking, there are 9 Dharma cultivators and 1 body cultivator. This is a sign of prosperity. The Supreme Disciple mocked. Junior brother who? You're not happy because our Dharmic vein is strong, but because there's no one in the sword vein, right? The disciples of the Three Pure Ones didn't care. So what if it is? Could it be that senior brother Yu is unhappy? Must there be a few sword cultivators in the top 10 for me to feel comfortable? The two of them bickered. As the two strongest five-ring orthodoxies, it was natural that they would never be on the same page. A mountain could not accommodate 2 tigers, unless one was male and the other was female. Because of the existence of the sword vein, The two orthodoxies were able to maintain a harmonious relationship. Without the sword vein, who knew what would happen? It was also human nature. Without opponents and competitors, there would be no development in the world of cultivation. The disciples of the smaller sects were also indifferent. They had seen this kind of situation too many times. The day when they stopped fighting each other would be the day when something big would happen. Thus, one of them interrupted, Xuanyuan's inner sword has been lacking in manpower recently. Of their two experts, Light Illuminator has been promoted to Jin Dan, so there's no one to replace him. But this Tonghulu external sword is also very strange. He's been ranked 11th for 100 years, and his position hasn't changed at all. An external sword who has never competed with anyone on the ranking can still hold such a high position. It's really hard to understand. His ignorant and ill-informed statement was despised by the disciples of several large sections. Taoist Jia Lanxia, who had been silent all this time, spoke up. You can't say that. Light Illuminator was very strong back then, right? He was ranked 9th. I heard that he lost to this Tonghulu external sword in front of tens of thousands of Foundation establishment cultivators in Xianyuan. With the tens of thousands of years of grudges between the external and external swords in Xianyuan, it's impossible that they went easy on him. Instead, it's more likely that they fought to the death. So this person's strength is not overestimated. Being ranked 11th is not an overestimation. He's the real deal. The Three Purities disciple surnamed, who is also very clear-headed. Amen, there's one more thing you're wrong about. It's not that this Tonghulu external sword hasn't fought to the death with anyone on the ranking. 50 years ago, there was a body cultivator from Taiyang Xingjian, senior martial brother Yu, who was ranked 49th in the body cultivator orthodoxy that your supreme sect values the most. Tumu fought with him for food in the Peacock Palace. In the end, he was killed by a sword. Senior martial brother Yu furrowed his brows. This guy was really a good-for-nothing. If you want to say it, just say it. Why did you have to bring up some supreme sect values the most? Fight for food? It was clearly this Tonghulu external sword who had evil intentions. He wanted to steal blood before killing people, okay? But he was a steady person. He knew that arguing about this wouldn't lead to a conclusion. Maybe this guy was waiting for him to speak. He wouldn't fall for this trick. Wasn't it just tearing open wounds and digging up old scores? You Three Purities still haven't cleaned up your sh*t. Thus, he said carelessly, Junior Martial brother, who is right? But it's not too comprehensive. I heard that back in Arai. Your Three Purities used an excuse to suppress the Kuandali realm and set up a 9-person arena bet. In the end, they invited external help. I think it was this Tonghulu external sword. The result was also strange. With this Tonghulu external sword as the vanguard, he defeated all 9 of you Dharma cultivators in one go. I heard that there were even those who didn't dare to go on stage and just admitted defeat. From this, it can be seen that this person's strength is really unfathomable. The discussion about the Xianyuan swordsmen returned to the topic of the 2 major Dharma cultivator sects attacking each other. You expose my shortcomings, I skin you. This was the most normal way for the supreme sect of the Three Purities to get along. But don't think that you can instigate conflict. In tens of thousands of years of history, this kind of internal strife was a trap that buried those who wanted to take advantage of the situation. Just as everyone was arguing, a figure swept across the sky. In the perception of the Dharma cultivators, it was the star escape technique that couldn't be clearer. But if you add in the eyes, it was a completely different matter. This was a swordsman who carried a sword case and used the star escape technique. And it was a foreign swordsman. Looking at the direction that the swordsman was flying in, everyone was shocked. That was the direction of fish leaping over the cliff. Fish leaping over the cliff was not a place that could be disrespected. This was the consensus reached by the 5 Rings cultivators. The goal was to ensure the authority of the ranking list. Only when the ranking list was truly authoritative could it attract the cultivators to compete for it. However, there were no special formations or cultivators to watch over it. But the person who made the ranking list had clearly stated that if anyone didn't respect themselves and trespassed on fish leaping over the cliff, that person would be disqualified from the ranking list forever. At the same time, the person's sect will be severely punished. There was only one exception: stabbing a sword into the cliff. That was impossible. No one expected to see such a magnificent feat in their lifetime. This wasn't just a matter of courage. There were many lunatics in the cultivation world, and there were always those who didn't care about anything and wanted to make a name for themselves. But the reaction of the cultivators towards such actions was surprisingly consistent. If you truly had the strength, then it was a different story. But if you were just trying to attract attention, how could the Five Rings cultivators let you off? Not only the person, but even the sect behind him would be unlucky. As if confirming their guesses, that figure disappeared from the top of the cliff. In the next moment, the entire fish leaping over the cliff shook. It wasn't the mountain that was shaking, but the mountain protection formation activated when the sword was stabbed into the cliff. At the same time, a line of blood-red words appeared on the huge mirror wall: Xianyuan Lu Xiaoi, challenging the heroes of the world. Chapter 445. The tremors of the array formation weren't limited to fish leaping cliff. They were instantly transmitted to the various branches of the fifth ring, to the places where the rankings were announced in real time. There were sects, as well as large cities and great clans. At this moment, the cultivation world of the fifth ring, which had been silent for many years, was seething with excitement. 3 pristine heavenly land, Supreme Immemorial Cloud Mountain, Sengarama Oracle Lake, and so on. The Meddlesome Foundation establishment stage cultivators set off on their respective journeys. This was not the action of the sects, but the spontaneous mentality of the Foundation establishment stage cultivators. The first wave of cultivators who set off were mostly the meddlesome ones. In fact, there were not many who had the ability to defeat the audacious challenger. This was determined by the specific shape of the fifth ring foundation establishment stage. The various sects and orthodoxies were scattered across the 5 rings of the continent, and their distances varied. The ones that were far away would take several years, while the ones that were close would take several months to cross the Wolf Ridge. Thus, a very practical question was, what if the challenge was already over after all the hardships they had to go through? There was no rule stating that anyone had to go. Other than the top 10 cultivators on the ranking, they were the first to bear the brunt of the challenge. Therefore, those who were rushing to the front were mostly idlers. Of course, there were also some who really wanted to test the strength of the challenger. This was especially true for the cultivators who were ranked around the 100th place. If they defeated the challenger, they would directly take over the position of the top 11 swordsmen. Based on history, the real challenge would only come 3 or 4 years later. When Lu Xiaoi showed his strength and made people look at him in a new light, the real experts would flock to him. The last 5 or 6 years would be the most difficult, because not only would the people who came to him be strong, but they would also have a clear understanding of his personal fighting habits. But he would not know what his opponent was good at. However, there were also large-scale groups that acted quickly. For example, Xianyuan, Flying Sword Mountain, Firmament Sword Sect. If their own swordsman wanted to act like a big boss, his brothers would definitely support him. Even though there was basically no injustice in fish leaping cliff, there was a huge difference between having one's own people and not having one's own people. With a large group of swordsmen standing there, anyone would restrain their thoughts of doing bad things. When Master Lu Xiaoi slammed his gavel on the table, someone had to shout mighty in silence. The higher-ups of Xianyuan reacted quickly. Regardless of whether it was the Thunder Palace or the Soaring Heaven Pavilion, they immediately issued a strict order, forbidding any swordsman below the peak of the Foundation establishment stage from entering. This was also a form of protection, protecting them so that they wouldn't waste 10 years in vain. It was human nature, and even more so, the nature of cultivators. The swordsman had not had such a joyous day in a long time. Although the order was strict, as long as one wanted to go there, there were countless loopholes. Therefore, whether it was when Guangfeng or Rising Heaven Pavilion, all the sect missions were snatched up. There was only one goal: to get out of the dome first. As for where to go after leaving, who would be able to check one by one? Soon, the mission was over. What came next was to visit relatives, friends, rest leave, marriage leave, home leave, period leave. There were countless weird reasons, such as second uncle's gray-tant's distant cousin who had unfortunately passed away, and he needed to offer his condolences. However, the fastest group to leave were, of course, those who were already at the peak of the Foundation establishment stage and were looking for opportunities to break through to the core formation stage. They had a legitimate reason, and no one could stop them. For example, the cursing Yinbo and the anxious second senior brother of the external sword sect. During this period of time, in a certain direction in the western regions, the light of flying swords in the sky had never stopped. One after another, endless and connected into a string. The cultivators who saw it felt strange. Was this a group of swordsmen going to fight? But it didn't seem like it. If they were organized, they should form a group before leaving. They couldn't just leave one by one. After they figure out the reason, a large group of idlers followed the sword lights and ran. As long as they were confident that they could barely cross Wolf Ridge, they wouldn't be willing to stay out of it. Making a ruckus was their nature. Regardless of whether they succeeded or failed in this challenge, it would be a joyous show. The Foundation establishment cultivators at the bottom of the fifth ring hadn't gathered like this in a long time. The outer heavens wasn't their domain, and the realm was also the main stage for Jindan. It was a stage that truly belonged to them, and Fish Leaping Cliff could definitely be called the most special place. It wasn't just the western regions. It was the same for the entire fifth ring. Some went to help Lu Xiaoyi set up a place, while even more went to undermine him. In terms of absolute numbers, the foundation of the law vein was much deeper than the sword vein. Therefore, even if the percentage of people who went was far less than the sword vein, they still had the advantage in terms of absolute numbers. In the Ascension Hall of Thousand Virtues Peak, several hall masters were still discussing this matter. One of the Jindan was very dissatisfied. This cigarette, but he didn't even report back when he left Peacock Palace. He does things his own way without any organization or discipline. Peacock Palace just caused trouble and was imprisoned for 50 years. Now that he's out, he's causing trouble again. Is he going to cause trouble for another 10 years? He wondered if this would affect the plans that the sect had been plotting all this time. If that's the case, this cigarette but's actions will be the root of the disaster. Another Jindan retorted, "The Peacock Palace incident isn't considered his fault, right? The sect has already decided on this point. It's just that it hasn't been announced yet. As for the sect's plans, they've already been in the works for decades. Who knows how many more years it'll take? With this style of planning, it might not even be announced even if this batch of disciples were to die. How can it affect the sect's plans? Stabbing Fish Leaping Cliff with a sword is indeed a bit reckless. However, since no one from our external sword sect has done so before, it's not wrong to set a precedent. There's no reason why our external sword sect can't do what our internal sword sect has done before. Success or failure isn't important. The key is to have the momentum. Their arguments were meaningless and couldn't change the facts. Moreover, the external sword sect didn't stipulate that their disciples couldn't stab Fish Leaping Cliff with a sword. They were limited by their strength and didn't have such extravagant hopes. However, now that a disciple had actually gone, doubts were doubts, but they couldn't be discouraged. Everyone understood this principle. One Jindan said, "Since he's already gone, we can't do anything about it. Why bother? I think this cigarette, but can still last for a few years. With his strength, isn't it too much to say that he's the de facto senior brother of the Dome Foundation establishment group? Is it too much for our Xuanyuan's senior brother to stab a sword?" Everyone sighed. They couldn't go, so they could only chat idly here. One Jindan looked at the Silent Hall Master Gu Gang. "Senior brother, I heard that you know this disciple very well. What do you think his actions this time have in mind? Will it succeed?" Gu Gang sighed. "I don't know what his intentions are. I haven't seen him in a long time. However, his temper isn't like that. Previously, It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was just a bum waiting to die. He's just a guy who isn't willing to take responsibility and lives his own life. But now, since he dares to stab a sword, it at least proves that he's beginning to have a hint of a swordsman's way of thinking. This change is what I value the most. Little Eagle will eventually grow up and soar into the sky. Whether he's willing or not, this is his final destination. However, based on my understanding, this kid isn't an impulsive person. Since he dares to stab a sword, it means that he's confident. Let's wait and see. Chapter 446. All the Foundation establishment cultivators in the Fifth Ring were in an uproar, but Fish Leaping Cliff wasn't as lively as the outside world. It could even be said that it was very quiet. Lu Xiaoyi sat cross-legged at the top of Fish Leaping Cliff for 10 days, but he didn't see a single person. This caused him to feel dispirited and frustrated, as if he had lost something, and he felt distressed towards the moon. This was a very normal situation. Those who stayed here weren't here to stop him, but to travel. Who knew they would encounter such a thing? In his divine sense, there were only about 100 cultivators who were pointing at him under the fish leaping down. The number of cultivators was slowly increasing at a daily pace. However, they were all here to travel, not to challenge him after hearing the news. There were a lot of Foundation establishment cultivators in the Fifth Ring group. Among the 100 or so cultivators who happened to be present, only a few were on the list. They were very accurate in their judgment of their strength, so they didn't come up at all. They knew that the limelight wasn't something they could bear. Those who were able to cross the Wolf Ridge were either cultivators in the late stage of Foundation establishment or at the peak of Foundation establishment. Those who were able to make it this far were all outstanding people. Their ability to accurately judge the strength of their enemies was the cornerstone of their survival. Sugar-Coated Hall was ranked 11th, and sword cultivators were generally cruel and merciless. Therefore, although almost everyone present had a bad opinion of him, it was absolutely impossible for him to go up and end the battle himself. Everyone preferred to see others rush to the front. On the 11th day, a heavyweight on the list finally arrived. Blood-Spotted Bamboo was a Taoist from the Bamboo Palace in the southeast region. He was a master ranked 69th. Blood-Spotted Bamboo was a nickname for something similar to Candied Haw. It was a Taoist name, and his real name was unknown. The Bamboo Palace's roots were in the Gemini star system, one of the 3 main star systems that had attacked the Sirius star system. After these foreign forces had settled down in the Fifth Ring, they had developed on their own. After tens of thousands of years, the world had changed, and there had been ups and downs. There were many forces that had declined, but there were also new forces that had been formed. For example, the Bamboo Palace was formed from the remnants of several original Gemini star system. The Sword Vein was a classic Law Vein faction. Their bloodline was at odds with the Sword Vein. Perhaps there were some other ancient reasons as well. Among the dozens of top factions in the Fifth Ring, the Sword Vein was one of the few factions that were at odds with the Sword Vein, especially against Xianyuan. Because the Wushang and the 3 Pure Ones occasionally supported the Sword Vein at critical moments, Xianyuan could do nothing about it. Daoist Song was passing by this place purely because of other reasons. Since he was passing by, he couldn't just pass by and not enter. Thus, when he passed by this place, he discovered the strangeness of this place. 200 cultivators gathered together, craning their necks and staring at the top of Fish Leaping Cliff, as if there was a peerless beauty or an immortal medicine up there. So they went up and asked. The Taoists were very enthusiastic, especially those from the Law Vein. The 3 Pure Ones' junior martial brother Hu, the Wushang senior martial brother Yu, and Taoist Xia from Temple described the whole process to him vividly. Although they came from big sects, cultivators revered strength. Since they were all law cultivators, Taoist Song's strength was naturally the backbone of this group of law cultivators. When he first heard this, he was very disdainful. You're just a swordsman who fights and runs at the same time, yet you dare to put up a flag and stick your sword on the top of Fish Leaping Cliff? For tens of thousands of years, even the inner sword couldn't do it. You, an outer sword, are you tired of living? The eyes are the windows to the heart. Although he was disdainful, his eyes showed his eagerness to try. The other cultivators hurriedly persuaded him. Taoist Xia from Temple said, "Senior Marshal Brother, wait. Why can't we let him run wild for a few days? Xian Yuan is like the monkey king when the tiger is not at home. The days of the inner sword are not going well, so the outer sword is in the limelight for a while. In reality, the overall strength of the inner sword is declining. This person is just taking advantage of this special period. After this period of time, if another strong cultivator appears in the inner sword, what does it have to do with him? What could the internal strife within the sect 60 years ago prove? There are still too few people on Fish Leaping Cliff now. There are only 100 or 200 of us. A large number of busybodies are still on their way. Since we want to embarrass Xian Yuan, it's best to do it in front of everyone. When everyone's eyes are on us, when the elite senior martial brothers of our law vein arrive, any one of them will be a piece of cake." All the Taoists nodded in agreement. Even Taoist Hu and Taoist Yu, who were always trying to undermine each other, clapped their hands and smiled. Of course, he knew that they had good intentions. They were also afraid that he would encounter an accident when he was alone. To be safe, of course, waiting was the best plan. But on second thought, he felt that something wasn't right. If he really waited for a few months, not to mention the senior martial brothers of the various sects and clans, even a few of the top 10 cultivators would definitely come. At that time, with his mere 69th position, how would he be able to make a move? In the Five-Ring Foundation establishment ranking, everyone tacitly agreed that the strength of the top 10 cultivators was similar. It didn't completely represent the difference in strength between them. In fact, not to mention the top 10 cultivators, even the top 30 cultivators didn't have any fundamental differences in strength. There were many factors that depended on who won, such as one's condition, environment, occasion, and restraints. There was such a perception that this ranking was not a real competition in a martial arts competition, but was determined through the scattered achievements of each person in the process of cultivation and constant contact with the outside world. Among them, the subjective speculations of outsiders accounted for a very important part of the factors. For example, Lu Xiaoyi was able to climb to the 11th place without fighting with any of the cultivators on the ranking list. Some people thought that this was just water, which was also reasonable. From this point of view, not to mention the top 10, the top 30, and even the top 100 cultivators didn't have much of a difference in strength. The reason why many people were ranked at the bottom wasn't because of their strength, but because they didn't show their faces in a sufficiently conspicuous situation. For example, he rarely had the opportunity to compete with top law vein cultivators and sword vein cultivators. Without a chance to show your face, how could you advance by leaps and bounds on the ranking? The Five-Ring Foundation establishment ranking would never provide an opportunity to compete purely for the sake of competing, because this didn't conform to the nature of the Great Tao. In truth, ever since the ranking had been established, it had always been unworthy of its name. Except for those who succeeded in stabbing their swords, those were the true heroes. Sometimes he thought about how glorious it would be if his strength increased greatly one day, and he could compete with everyone on the Fish Leaping Cliff under the gaze of all the cultivators in the Five-Ring Foundation establishment ranking. Unfortunately, it was just a dream in the end. It was too unrealistic. Therefore, when Xinyuan Yijian did what he had always wanted to do, but did not dare to do, it made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Naturally, he had a thought. Even if I can't get on the fish leap sword insertion, 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 sword insertion. At the very least, the difficulty would be reduced a lot. It would be just one battle, and not countless battles over a period of 10 years. Chapter 447. Noticing the change in his expression, the three cultivators at the side continued to persuade him. Junior brother, who tried his best to persuade him and did not hesitate to expose his own shortcomings. Senior brother, this cigarette but is extraordinary. Decades ago, in the gambling arena of Arise Koen Dao, he single-handedly defeated 9 cultivators from the 3 pure ones. Now that I think about it, it's unbelievable. 70 to 80 years have passed. It's hard to say how much his strength has grown. For safety's sake, it's better to be cautious. Senior brother Yu at the side had an opinion. Junior brother, your intentions are very good. We can all understand. But even so, you can't overestimate others' might and destroy your own spirit, right? Using 1 against 9 is just a gimmick. As far as I know, he only exchanged blows with 4 of your sect disciples. The others were merely your sect's elders who saw that the situation was hopeless and chose to retreat strategically. How could they have actually fought? Moreover, the 9 people from your sect don't seem to have anyone on the ranking list, right? If you say that the 3 pure ones sent out all their elites, then you're talking nonsense. That was 70 to 80 years ago. However, this person seemed to have committed a crime in the Peacock Palace and was imprisoned by the Peacock Plume for 50 years. How could he cultivate in that kind of place? Therefore, if we talk about how much progress he has made, there's a big question mark. However, Junior Brother's overall meaning is still correct. Just like in the Peacock Palace, my closest ally, Tian Xinjian, one of the experts on the ranking list, Tumu, was beheaded by this person. Tumu was ranked 49th. Senior Brother, you're ranked. Therefore, what I mean is, it's better to take the long view. After Senior Brother, you retorted, it was unknown what evil he had done, but Taoist Jia Lan Xia at the side did not agree. Senior Brother Yu's words are not true. Most of it is true, but when you say that the swordsman beheaded Tumu with 1 sword, there's actually a deeper reason. A close friend of mine was also in the space of the Peacock Plume at that time, and he was in the team that met the accident. According to him, there was actually another reason why Tumu was killed at that time. Firstly, he was shackled by the Peacock Fairy and could not use his full strength. Secondly, the direction of the peacock blood at that time happened to be flying in the direction of Tumu. As a result, Tumu had selfish thoughts in his heart. So, even though this Tonghulu is strong, we have to be realistic, right? However, I heard that this person defeated Guangming of the Inner Sword in a battle between the Inner and Outer Swords in Xinyuan 60 years ago. Everyone knows about Guangming, right? Top 10. If that's the case, then this sugar-coated Haas can't be underestimated. It's better to be cautious. Taoist Xia's words were reasonable, but they aroused the dissatisfaction of Taoist one of the 3 pure ones. None of you are on point. Needless to say, the candied Haas are ferocious. This is also my opinion. However, was the internal competition of the sect the same as the external competition? Among us, which one of us hasn't gone through countless big and small competitions in the sect? Even if you stand out in the sect and win every battle, as long as you walk out, it's a completely different matter. Without the protection of the elders of the sect, without the uncertainty of life and death, it was not a real battle. That's why I said that him being able to defeat the light doesn't really mean anything. Xia Huyo and the other 2 were engaged in a battle of words. However, the core of their conversation was to advise Tsung Yi to be cautious and not act rashly. However, in Tsung Yi's ears, these words had eliminated many of his concerns. Yes, defeating the light in internal competition was meaningless. Killing Tumu in external competition was because Tumu was greedy and unlucky. Then, what was there to be afraid of for such a person? There were many undeserved names on the rankings, and he, the sugar-coated Haas, was not one of them. When he first came here and heard the news, he only had 10 or 20% fighting spirit. He still knew to consider the consequences of his actions. In the end, after a round of persuasion from these Dharma lineage cultivators, his fighting spirit was instead raised to 10%. That's right, that's it. One must become famous as soon as possible. Too many people wouldn't be able to do it. If he really waited for a large group of Dharma lineage cultivators to arrive, what could he do? When he thought of killing this arrogant swordsman and standing proudly at the top of Fish Leaping Peak, receiving the admiring gazes of everyone, he was a little hesitant. Should he leave after killing him? Or should he wait for more people to arrive? It was truly a difficult choice. Yes, Leaving after killing him is even more dignified. Although I'm not here, my name will forever be left behind in the Five Rings. Let's do that. Taoist who took out a jug of wine. Wolf Ridge is remote and simple. I have a jug of immortal wine. Let's welcome senior brother. Taoist who flipped his hand and took out a jade plate and 4 wine cups. Taoist who activated his Dharma power and separated 4 lines of wine into the cups, pouring them evenly. Not a drop more, not a drop less. The 3 cultivators raised their cups in unison. I raise my cup to drink on the matters of the world. If it doesn't concern me, don't get involved. Come, come, come. The Supreme 3 Purities Temple congratulates Senior Brother Bamboo Palace. Taoist, you couldn't help but be filled with pride when he saw this. This was a tribute from the 3 strongest Dharma lineages in the 5 Rings. This was an affirmation of the Bamboo Palace's strength. As a member of the Bamboo Palace, he felt honored. However, he was also a person with a sense of responsibility. As the saying goes, many hands make light work. The strength of the Bamboo Palace was accumulated bit by every cultivator, regardless of their cultivation level, gender, age, or background. It was accumulated bit by bit. As for him, he didn't mind contributing his meager strength to the strength of his sect, but he didn't accept the cup. Instead, he proudly smiled. Pour the wine. I'll be right back. A hero's life or death was decided by a cup of wine. Now that he had returned victorious, the cultivation world would spread another legend that belonged to the Bamboo Palace, that belonged to him. Seeing him fly through the air amidst the cheers of the cultivators, the 3 persuaders behind him glanced at each other. Taoist Xia raised his cup. To the first, junior brother who flicked his sleeve. To a happy cooperation. Senior brother, you smiled. To the prosperity of my Dharma meridians. The 3 drank their cups in one gulp. Nothing needed to be said. What prosperity of the Dharma meridians? It was just the prosperity of the Supreme 3 Purities Temple. As for the other rising stars, who cared if they died? Junior brother who continued, I bet 2 breaths. Senior brother, you agreed. 3 breaths. Taoist Xia was even more extreme. 1 breath. Their words were enshrouded in fog. The people around them couldn't understand what they were betting on. But all of this wasn't important. This courageous body cultivator dared to be the first in the world, and he'd used a cup of wine to kill the ferocious and stubborn. Not to mention anything else. Merely this courage and bearing of his wasn't something that those great sects in their twilight years could compare to. The cliff was high and the wind was gentle. The Pingtian Plateau was clear and cloudless. Because of their line of sight, they couldn't see the sword stabber at the top of the cliff, but they could see the fearless protector. He was quickly approaching the top of the cliff. In the process of approaching, the light of Dharma spells overlapped. That was the light of defensive Dharma spells. Some of them were widely used in the Foundation establishment realm, while others were the secret true teachings of the Bamboo Palace. Evidently, as a Taoist, he had courage and confidence. However, as an experienced Dharma cultivator on a ranking board, he did not lose his rationality because of unnecessary confidence. The thickness, density, and naturalness of the defense around his body made one gasp in amazement. In such a majestic aura, a bright light flashed from the top of the cliff. In an instant, it collided with Taoist Xia, who seemed to be covered in countless layers of armor. Blood splattered. Glory was gone. Taoist Xia stretched out his hand. I won. Chapter 448. Almost all the Dharma cultivators present felt as if they had been smashed in the head. Of course, there were a few exceptions. The 3 great hoodwinkers calmly held their cups in their hands, as well as Smoker, who was watching silently from afar. She did not know how Lu Xiaoyi did it. She only knew that she would never be able to do it. Perhaps she could do it after becoming a Jin Dan, but what could this guy do after becoming a Jin Dan? It was unimaginable. A top Dharma cultivator ranked in the top 100 without any carelessness would be like paper under the attack of a flying sword. This was no longer a matter of tactics, but a matter of level. She finally understood where this guy's confidence came from. Under such an attack, there was no need for him to recover, because the battle would be very short. There was also no need for him to use a close-range sword, because no one could get close to him. When the power reached its peak, the others could only feel shock. The three great hoodwinkers were still very impressive. It had to be said that as a traditional Taoist sect that had been competing with Xianyuan for tens of thousands of years for the right to speak in the fifth ring, they were able to exist in this world. They were able to eat well, drink well, and cultivate well. They had their own unique side to them. Even some of the ordinary elite disciples below them had their own graceful and magnanimous demeanor. Such a demeanor and foundation was not something a nouveau riche like the bamboo palace could possess. Therefore, even though Guan Yi had left, the three of them were still alive and well. Senior brother Yu pretentiously poured the remaining cup of wine on the ground and declared, "My soul has returned. My soul has returned. I'll be faithful to you till the end. Have a good journey." Beside him, a quick-witted cultivator from a small sect was disdainful. How the hell could he have a good journey? If his soul really returned, he might not necessarily go looking for trouble with that swordsman. He would go looking for you three old bastards first. It's not going to be easy. Ordinary people won't be able to test his trump cards at all. He has all kinds of methods and preferred battle tactics. With just this heavy sword, ordinary techniques definitely won't be able to block it. There won't be a future. Junior brother Three Purities said melancholically. Although his strength was not enough to enter the rankings, Dharma cultivators had a unique trait. They had sharp eyes and a deep foundation in theory, so they could quickly discover the essence of a battle. We have to have the ability to block his opening attack. Only then will there be a future. From the looks of it, there doesn't seem to be any other methods other than the dimensional reduction artifact. The dimensional reduction Dharma artifact that senior brother you mentioned was actually a quasi-spirit artifact. In the cultivation world, Zhuji cultivators used magic tools, Jindan cultivators used spiritual tools, Yuanian cultivators used treasure tools, and Jinjuan cultivators used Dao tools. All of these tools were refined by different cultivators according to their own cultivation level and strengths. Lowering the limitations of Jindan cultivators' spiritual tools, reducing their power, and disregarding their lifespan and irreversible damage to the cultivator. Then, Foundation Establishment cultivators could also use Jindan spirit tools to a certain extent. Of course, such spirit tools could no longer be called spirit tools. Its power was much weaker than a real spirit tool, but it was also much stronger than a magic tool. Many of these spirit tools could only be used once. Very few sects and forces would deliberately make such things, because the precious materials and time wasted were completely worthless compared to the effects achieved. On the contrary, it would cause the disciples to be immersed in their dependence on it, and the gains did not make up for the losses. However, it was different for large sects like the Supreme Sect, the Three Pure Ones, and Temple. They were rich in resources and had a lot of talented people. They had the time and financial resources to make such things, so the three of them were not unfamiliar with it. Even so, the dimensionality reduction spirit tool would not generally exist in the hands of the common cultivators. Only the most outstanding few seeds would be given such a dimensionality reduction spirit tool by the sect as a last resort. In fact, they were also afraid that the disciples would become dependent on it. This was for the future of the great Tao, so it could not be neglected. However, in the storehouses of these large sects, there were many similar things prepared just in case of a war. This was the foundation of the large forces of the Dharma lineage. Taoists nodded. We can't rule out some special methods, such as enchantments and supernatural powers. However, for Foundation Establishment, they are very rare. The spirit of the Foundation Establishment is ultimately unable to support these superior techniques. Difficult. Lu Xiaoyi sat cross-legged at the top of the fish-leaping peak, licking the candied haws in his mouth. His heart was calm. The first cultivator must die. This was an important part of the overall strategy. Just like the defenders in the football games in his previous life, They had to show their toughness and fierceness when defending against the opponent's striker's first attack. If you did not do so, the opponent would frequently make trouble in the area you were defending, and there would be no end to it. Only by killing the first or even the first few people, leaving a ruthless and cruel reputation, would those who did not know when to stop and stop. Only then could they understand that this was a fight to the death, not a competition between friends who appreciated each other's talents. Otherwise, they would die of exhaustion sooner or later. Killing people was also saving people. The metaphysics of Taoism was shown incisively and vividly here. Even if it left a bad reputation, it was much better than killing more people because of frequent challenges in the next 10 years, or even decades or centuries. To be honest, many of them were indeed very annoying, but they would not kill them. Common sense was everywhere in life. Just like the street gangsters who wore their arms to show their hipsters and carried bricks with their fierce eyes, they were actually very afraid in their hearts. But they had to pretend to be so to frighten others. This was also a kind of protection for themselves. Liu Xiaoyi took his first step as a swordsman. For the sake of his previous promise, he bravely challenged the fifth ring, a feat that few people had been able to accomplish in tens of thousands of years. However, his heart was not so hard that he could ignore the lives of others. Perhaps one day in the future, his heart would reach the level of stone, but now was not the time. He pretended to be tough, but in fact, it was to cover up the weakness in his heart. 10 days after the sword was inserted into the fish-leaping peak, it finally ushered in a climax. However, this climax was too short and too shocking, directly extinguishing the thoughts of the few cultivators nearby who were eager to try it. At least he had achieved his goal. He resolutely extinguished the challenges of these opportunists. This kind of boredom continued for a few more months. The number of cultivators increased every day, but those who came were originally tourists, not challengers. The only thing they had in common was that once they came, they did not leave. The number of people slowly exceeded 500, then 1,000. Everyone found a good spot around the fish-leaping peak to observe. Those with Dharma vein, sword vein, body vein, unorthodox vein, it was very important to find a good spot because soon there would be a continuous peak period. When a large number of cultivators arrived, you would no longer be able to hold on to your original spot. A Dharma cultivator mingling with other orthodoxies was like holding a Dharma assembly. The cultivators were very familiar with this. 3 months later, the first group of over 100 cultivators arrived in groups. This was the orthodoxy closest to the fish-leaping peak. There was no need to take a long detour. They only needed to cross half of the Wolf Ridge. Among them, there were bound to be some with grievances. It was only at this time that the Battle of the Sword could be considered to have truly begun. Chapter 449. The bugle call that started attacking Liu Xiaoyi was from the body cultivators. It wasn't that body cultivators were brainless, but they preferred to use direct methods. Furthermore, body cultivators had always believed that among the cultivation world's restraints, body cultivators' restraints on sword cultivators were the most real. The marching sect was a large body cultivator orthodoxy in the Arai region. It wasn't within the top powers of the fifth ring, but its actual strength wasn't much different from the top powers. The marching sect's area of influence was close to the Wolf Ridge, which was where the fish-leaping cliff was located. Therefore, when they heard the news, it was time for them to cross the Wolf Ridge. Body cultivators also had their own goals. As one of the 3 most important orthodoxies in the fifth ring, body cultivators had always been suppressed by spell cultivators. This wasn't just a matter of orthodoxy, it was a matter of the spell cultivator's basic principles. If the spell cultivator wanted to dominate, the most important thing was to suppress the growth of the second brother. Who was the second brother in the fifth ring? Many people thought that it was the arrogant swordsman, but the higher-ups of the spell cultivator knew that this wasn't the case. The real second brother was actually a body cultivator. The reason was simple. No matter how happy the swordsmen were, they had a fatal weakness that they couldn't solve. That was the problem of the number of swordsmen. The foundation of a Xianyuan swordsman was the inner sword. The number of inner swords in the sword orb of the sword catacomb couldn't be expanded on a large scale. For tens of thousands of years, the only thing the Xianyuan people could do was to maintain the number of inner swords and work tirelessly on the quality. The same thing happened to the sword orb of the firmament sword sect and the sword box of the Wei sword mountain. All of this determined that the sword vein could only be a sharp knife. They couldn't rule the entire cultivation world. Therefore, no matter how tense the relationship between the two parties was, the spell cultivators knew that the sword vein couldn't replace the spell vein because of their natural weakness in reproduction. Body cultivators were different. They didn't have the restrictions of a sword orb and sword box. Like the orthodox spell vein, they could expand infinitely. Because they were closer to the essence of the strength bloodline, the threshold was lower. The style of fighting was more easily accepted by hot-blooded youths. Therefore, in the fifth ring, where the culture was fierce, its mass foundation could rival that of the spell vein. This was a true orthodoxy that could replace the ruling position of the law lineage. Among the principles of the law vein, suppressing the sword vein was an act of madness, while suppressing the body vein was a core principle that had never been loosened. For physical meridians, they had always been at an absolute disadvantage in the tens of thousands of years of struggle against dermic meridians. The difference was in all aspects, and there was no light of hope. Therefore, in recent years, a major cultivator of physical meridians had proposed a new direction. If they could not catch up to eldest brother for now, could they suppress third brother first? This kind of debate continued. The three sides contended for supremacy. The second and third brothers working together to fight against the boss was the most classic strategy. The struggle between the second and third brothers would only make the boss laugh his head off. Even mortals understood the principle that the teeth would be interdependent if the lips were gone. There was no reason why cultivators didn't understand. However, third brother's behavior had become more and more overbearing over the past tens of thousands of years. He considered himself the second brother, and in all aspects of the five-ring world, whether it was resources, talents, territory, etc., he never knew how to restrain himself. This caused the physical meridian's resentment towards the sword vein to grow. Of course, it was impossible for a cultivation war to break out, but in certain aspects, the sword vein was not willing to fall behind. This included the five-ring foundation establishment ranking. A few decades ago, the top 10 of the ranking was basically dominated by the law vein and sword vein. The body vein would occasionally show up, but in recent years, after the sword vein's brilliance reached the core formation stage, there was a gap. Finally, some individual cultivators took advantage of the situation and squeezed into the top 10. This was something that the physical meridians were happy to see. They knew that it was impossible to keep the sword vein out of the top 10 forever. However, if they could drag this out for a longer period of time, it would undoubtedly be of great benefit to the physical meridians. After tens of thousands of years, the ranking had already formed a trend of public opinion. It might not be worth mentioning in the eyes of superior cultivators, but to ordinary mortals, chi refinement warriors, and those who had just entered the foundation establishment stage, it had an increasingly important guiding effect. Just like the ranking of higher education institutions in Lu Xiaoyi's previous life, it had practical significance. Every student with outstanding results would be ranked from top to bottom, and not from bottom to top. First choose your major, then your school. There were even those who chose their school first, then their major. In this cultivation world, schools were the major sects and forces. The supreme three pure ones, Xianyuan, and so on were ranked below. Majors were the orthodoxies. Do you prefer dharma, sword, or body cultivation? There was no newcomer who did not want to enter a higher class school. It was precisely because of this mentality of wanting to climb higher that the outstanding new foundation establishment cultivators would naturally flock to the 9, 8, 5, 2, 1, and 1. It was also because of this flow of talent that the strong would always be strong, and the weak would always be weak. Over a long period of time, the major sects that recruited more outstanding talents would produce more Jin Dan, Yuanying, and even people who were strong enough to change the trend of cultivation. This was the most important aspect of his sex orthodoxy, the root of the matter, and the five-ring foundation establishment ranking was increasingly showing its guiding role. This was also the reason why the major sects and forces still encourage their disciples to strive for the top, even though they seem to be dismissive of such a ranking on the surface. There must be someone or a few forces secretly condoning this. As for who exactly it was self-evident just by looking at who was at the top of the ranking. This was a very clever way to recruit outstanding talents. Even the sword vein, which had always been known for its valiant combat strength, could not occupy half of the top spots. From this, it could be seen that there was a deep-seated reason behind this. This was a battlefield without smoke. Even if there was no explicit war, the far-reaching calculations behind the scenes were everywhere. It was also because of this mentality that other than the sword vein, no one wanted the swordsman to succeed in such a genuine sword insertion. It meant a decisive trend, just like how the value of a Nobel Prize winner in an academy would definitely multiply. The marching sect had 2 physical cultivators who were in the top 100 of the ranking, but they did not come this time. This was because the sect was worried that if they failed, they would lose their original positions. Even though they were physical cultivators, they were not stupid at all. Among the group of cultivators from the marching sect who came this time, it was confirmed that 3 of them would be the ones to issue the challenge. At least from the marching sect's point of view, these 3 disciples were not weaker than the 2 on the ranking. They just lacked some opportunities. This was especially so for one of the ancient blood physical cultivators. He had cultivated wholeheartedly for over 100 years and had already reached an unimaginable level in terms of physical techniques. They believed that with this level of strength, he was completely confident of pulling down this Tongvalu. They had to hurry. Once the large group of Dharma Meridian cultivators arrived, they would have nothing to do. Chapter 450. Lu Xiaoyi knew that this was a body cultivator. Their physical characteristics were as obvious as a swordsman carrying a sword on his back. However, he did not have the time to guess this person's magical powers. In the future, he would not recognize any of his opponents, let alone know what they were good at. Therefore, there was no need to guess. The correct method was to test it out with his sword. His heavy sword could test out most people's treasures because no one could hide anything between life and death. If he could do it, it meant that his opponent's strength was above his, and there was no need to hide. The first time he killed that spell cultivator, he used the 4 seasons. This time, he used the Jew City. In terms of penetration, the Jew City was above the 4 seasons. To body cultivators, they were not used to hiding and preferred to fight head-on. Therefore, the speed and agility of the 4 seasons were redundant in front of a body cultivator. As he advanced, that body cultivator was like a running car. His figure gradually grew. This was the Dharma idol. This was the basic ability of a body cultivator. He did not use any weapons. His weapons were his fists. This was also the battle form of most body cultivators. They believed in their own bodies, and, through continuous strengthening, they had reached a frightening level. In the eyes of body cultivators, using weapons would give them another direction to cultivate. They might as well focus all their energy on their bodies and use their bodies as weapons. Facing Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword, he only used a simple punch. Within the punch was a magical power, collapsing mountain. In front of the fist, a vacuum of about 3 feet thick formed, enveloping the Jew City. As the flying sword advanced, it was as if it was not in a vacuum environment, but in a material medium. The intense friction caused the head of the flying sword to emit dazzling metallic sparks. He waved his right fist. Under the collision of the 2 forces, the body cultivator immediately realized that his collapsing mountain could not stop the flying sword from advancing. This was the intuition of a cultivator. Thus, he swung his left fist again and activated the mountain-shattering divine power twice in a row. However, he still couldn't stop the flying sword from piercing through his chest. However, the Dharma idol stood tall and didn't fall. The body cultivator didn't seem to feel anything. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The uniqueness of physique cultivators was indeed the bane of the swordsman's physical penetrating orthodoxy in certain aspects. Firstly, the penetrating power of Ju City had already been depleted by the two mountain stomps. Secondly, Dharma forms couldn't be measured by the normal distribution of human organs. The human heart was on the left side of the chest, but the position of the heart could be changed after transforming into the Dharma form. Powerful body cultivators could hide their important body parts anywhere on the Dharma form. Of course, Foundation establishment cultivators could not do it, but they could hide their heart somewhere between the chest and abdomen. Therefore, when the flying sword pierced down, it needed to accurately determine the position of the heart. Otherwise, it would not be fatal. The sword aura of the flying sword could complete this task within the Dharma form's body. Unfortunately, when the Ju City entered the body, the sword aura had already been depleted and the remaining power was limited. Physique cultivators might not be able to cultivate so many changes in battle, but their specialization in divine powers and the body made it very difficult for them to be killed quickly. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi did not use all his strength. He only released one sword spirit out of the 6. The physique cultivator was testing his attack, and he was also testing the physique cultivator's defense. This was a rare opportunity to test the Dharma form and physique cultivators at the beginning of the 10 years of sword piercing. When a large group of divine powers and physique cultivators arrived, he would definitely not waste his spiritual power to carry out such a boring test. The Dharma form of the physique cultivator didn't suffer much damage. Under the powerful recovery ability of the bloodline, it quickly recovered. It seemed to be unharmed, but the physique cultivator was suffering. He was attacked by the flying sword at a distance of 6,000 feet. When he was attacked, he used the inertia to charge forward a few hundred feet. However, he was still 5,000 feet away from his opponent, not entering the attack range of his divine powers. His divine powers had a maximum range of 5,000 feet and an effective range of 4,000 feet. In other words, he was still 1,000 feet away from being beaten and unable to retaliate. This was the benefit of a long distance. If his hands were short, he could only endure. The flying sword arrived as expected. The 4 seasons came right in front of him, and beside him, Zhu Cheng circled and began his second attack. The physique cultivator's heart sank. If the second flying sword had the same strength as the first, his Dharma form might not be able to help him. He was here to test the strength of his opponent's attack, not to die. The marching sect's only hope of defeating the sword piercing was his senior brother, not him. Now, he needed to fight for his life at this awkward distance. His body stopped charging forward, and his Dharma form started to spin faster and faster. It was like a spinning top that was constantly being spun. This was his only defensive divine power, physique Tua technique. The awakened divine powers of physique cultivators were mainly offensive divine powers and supportive divine powers. Purely defensive divine powers were very rare. This was the balance that the heavenly Tao had in the distribution of Taoism. The principle was that once a physique cultivator had an extremely strong Dharma form, it would be very difficult for him to obtain new powerful divine powers in terms of defense. This was not in line with the nature of cultivation. In theory, the Taoist system did not allow for a single unsolvable aspect to appear. Of course, there were always exceptions, and this physique cultivator was such an exception. When his Dharma form and physique Tua technique were combined together, he waved his arms in a frenzy and struck out with mountain-crushing divine powers. In the marching sect, there was no one who could break his defense. This was also the reason why he was the vanguard among the marching sect cultivators. However, the flying sword did not land. Zhu Cheng and 4 Seasons circled above his head and danced lightly. It was obvious that they wanted to see how long he could spin like this. The physique cultivator was in an awkward position. In his current state, he could not move quickly. In other words, the other party could easily maintain a safe distance from him and watch him spin with their sharp swords hanging high. He could not stop yet. because the moment he stopped, the flying sword would definitely land. And it would be very difficult for him to burst out with such a strong defense again in a short period of time. No matter if it was forward or backward, he was under the control of his opponent. If he was in the wild, his situation would not bode well for him. However, he could still be saved now because he could still retreat, even if it was embarrassing. Under the shocked gazes of the people below the cliff, the physique cultivator began to retreat. Embarrassing himself was better than losing his life. Physique cultivators were not afraid of death, but they would not seek death. This was a strange scene. The Dharma form came with an aggressive aura and then retreated as if it had gone crazy. It could not stop at all. All of this was because the swordsman did not play by the rules. Since you sent out the flying sword, how could you not attack? Wasn't this just toying with him? After retreating another 1,000 feet, the two flying swords returned to their sheaths one after another. Lu Xiaoyi did not make a move. This person was already crippled, and there was no need for him to make a final attack. He could clearly judge that his two flying swords would definitely pierce through this body cultivator's defense and take his life. However, doing so would also bring harm to his sword spirit. The body cultivator's defensive divine ability was not just for show. There was a price to be paid for it. He was a little reluctant. Chapter 451. The body cultivator spun and fell. He wasn't hurt by the flying sword, but rather, he spun too quickly and was exhausted. With the support of his companions, he finally managed to stabilize himself. To be honest, because of the threat of death, he spun faster and fiercer than he had ever spun in his life. It was a little embarrassing, but at least he managed to keep his life. In fact, the essence of the entire battle was the swordsman's unstoppable first sword. He did test the strength of the flying sword, but at the same time, he lost his confidence, which led to a series of overreactions. He activated his tubular body technique too early. The right thing to do should have been to use mountain collapse to block the flying sword, and then activate it according to the flying sword's progress. However, he was afraid that his Dharma form wouldn't be able to withstand the flying sword's attack, so he activated earlier to maximize the power of the tubular body technique. In the end, he was one of the 3 body cultivators selected by the military sect to be able to fight, and the next one should be the other. However, this person had a good temperament and wasn't afraid of his companion's failure at all. He wanted to go up. However, he didn't expect a hand to stop him. Bu Chu was the person that the military sect had high hopes for this time. His bloodline was ancient, and his strength was shocking. After 100 years of hard work, it was time for him to amaze everyone. "You're not his opponent. Leave it to me." His words were very direct and hurtful. His meaning was also clear. Since they would only embarrass the military sect, why should they give the swordsmen their battle records? Although they were reluctant, they were all afraid of the internal conflicts in the sect. They knew the true strength of this senior brother, so they didn't dare to say anything and could only retreat silently. Bu Chu slowly stepped out with the cloud steps. His skinny figure was very eye-catching among the group of strong body cultivators, but this had nothing to do with his status. The body cultivators of the military sect all knew the strength of this senior brother, and this was also one of the few opportunities for him to show his abilities. After 100 years of hard work, he would have to face the core formation stage. Therefore, to him, there wasn't much time for him to fight on the leaderboard. This battle was the best opportunity for him to become famous. After that, he would continue to train hard and at least leave his own legend in the base of the 5 rings. Lu Xiaoyi could feel this kind of pressure. There wasn't any change in him finally becoming serious. He had always been serious. A cultivator must respect a battle. For seasons first, 8 out of 8, the goat horn technique, the Tao of Stars, and the sword force were unleashed. Lu Xiaoyi had used all his strength in this attack. This was his fighting philosophy. He was not willing to waste time on pointless probing. If he did not use his full strength, how could he make his opponent use all his trump cards to defend? A simple probing was completely meaningless. His speed suddenly increased, but he did not form the most basic Dharma idol body of a body cultivator. This was very unusual, but it could not shake the indomitable will of the flying sword. As the flying sword approached, it easily pierced through Buchu's body. Because there was no resistance, the sword chi inside Buchu's body was able to explode to its greatest extent. This kind of power was not something a foundation establishment cultivator could resist with just their physical body. Buchu frowned as if he was enduring some kind of pain. Then, an illusory Dharma idol came out of his body. It carried the power of the flying sword and exploded in the sky. When the Dharma idol left his body, Buchu's body also suddenly moved from 6,000 feet away to 3,000 feet away. He raised his arms, and a spell suddenly appeared in front of Lu Xiaoyi. It was like a cross, and as it spun, the surrounding space faintly fluctuated. Lu Xiaoyi's figure flashed, and Zhu Cheng whistled out to intercept it. He had been guessing how many opponents he would have to face before they could force him to use his sword. The result was beyond his expectations. His third opponent had done it. There were many hidden dragons and crouching tigers among the Five Rings cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi was not the only one with opportunities. Since Zhu Cheng had moved, there was no need to add fuel to the fire. Big Dipper and Hidden Fragrance shot out. Since the battle had begun, the swordsman's principle was to attack until the opponent could not do anything. If they could not do this, the swordsman had no advantage in terms of defense and all-around defense. Lu Xiaoyi was chased up and down by Buchu's Dharma idol cross. He needed to use his escape technique and Zhu Cheng to defend together. Buchu was unable to form an effective defense under the attacks of the Four Seasons, Hidden Fragrance, and Big Dipper flying swords. He was also smart. He did not defend at all. Instead, he continuously sent out Dharma idols from his body, causing the flying sword's power to explode. The fierce battle in the sky suddenly heated up. It also allowed the spectating cultivators to finally see the battle they wanted to see. The only thing they felt was that they were lucky they did not go up. Taoist Zhao Lanxia was somewhat puzzled. This is the Dharma idol cross? Can a body cultivator at the foundation establishment stage cultivate this kind of Dharma idol? Taoist Wu Shangyi nodded. It is indeed the Dharma idol cross, and it is a high-level Dharma idol cross. After the Dharma idol cross leaves the body, the Dharma idol cross can teleport in the opposite direction. Of course, foundation establishment cultivators can't cultivate this kind of Dharma idol cross. This is Jean Dan's Dharma idol cross. But for body cultivators, there is another possibility, an abnormal bloodline. I reckon that this Buchu has inherited an ancient bloodline. Having this kind of talent is an individual phenomenon and not a common ability. In the cultivation world, there were many capable people with strange abilities. It was very normal for them to have strange abilities. An individual's ability did not represent anything, and it could not change the balance between the powers of the sections. Just like Lu Xiaoyi's Dharma idol cross, Buchu's Dharma idol cross, their individual ability would not cause too much of stir in the cultivation world. But if Su Yuan's external swords could all cultivate Dharma idol cross, then everyone in the marching sect could use the Dharma idol cross. This would be a major event that could change the situation of the cultivation world. Taoist Xia was clearly not very proficient in body cultivator techniques. This Dharma idol cross is so marvelous. Looking at the situation, it can be revealed infinitely. Doesn't that mean it will always be in an invincible position? This goes against the principles of the great Tao. Taoist three purities curled his lips. Who said it can be revealed infinitely? It's just a matter of where the limit is. This swordsman understands it very well. Look at his constant attacks. It looks like he's doing nothing, but he's actually forcing the body cultivator to reveal the Dharma idol cross. Although the flying sword consumes a lot of energy, the Dharma idol cross consumes a lot of energy. If you don't believe me, just watch. They won't be able to fight like this for long. There will definitely be a change in the next few breaths, and it must be the body cultivator who's looking for a change. Senior Brother Yu expressed his agreement. Body cultivators usually have no less than 4 or 5 divine abilities. Buchu has only used 2 of his Dharma Idol Cross and Dharma Idol Cross. There's still a long way to go. However, to be able to get close to the swordsman with just 2 divine abilities, this kind of ability should be at least in the top 30 of the rankings, or even higher. The body cultivators have wild ambitions. They want to replace the body cultivators in the Dharma Idol Cross. There are many hidden experts, and they would rather hide than come out to fight for the rankings. They have ulterior motives. Junior brother who laughed. You have many experts like this hidden as well, don't you? Senior brother, you sneered. Likewise. Chapter 452. The reason why Lu Xiaoyi was in such a difficult position was because he had spent most of his energy on attacking. Otherwise, a mere cross twist would not have made him so embarrassed. It was fine if he was in a difficult position, but the key was to break through his opponent's defense. Otherwise, there would be no chance of victory. Of course, he did not understand the divine powers of a body cultivator. Not to mention body cultivators, he did not even know much about the mainstream techniques of the cultivators. However, this did not mean that he did not have his own judgment. If this body cultivator's illusory form could be switched endlessly, then there was no need to fight. He could just admit defeat and leave. The purpose of a fast-paced attack was to force out the limit of the illusory form. There was no one in this world who could not die. He could also see that his flying sword could not hurt his opponent, not because it was not powerful enough, but because the nature of the power was different. His flying sword was of a normal nature, while the body cultivator's defense was of a mysterious level. Therefore, they did not match. It was not that they were completely unequal, but under the mysterious effect, his fierce attacks were all diverted to unknown places. From the start of the battle until now, the body cultivator's illusory form had already been revealed 8 times, blocking death for him 8 times. How many more times could he withstand? Lu Xiaoyi did not believe it. In the world of cultivators, there was no such thing as a method that went against the Tao. As long as you had enough insight, you would definitely be able to get close to the truth. Lu Xiaoyi understood this point, and so did the knowledgeable disciples of the large sections. After 2 breaths, Buchu suddenly changed his move. He used the advanced form of the illusory form. After his illusory form was revealed, his true form instantly closed in. He opened his arms, and his entire body suddenly expanded. Then, he wrapped his arms inwards. This was his 3rd divine power, the bear hug. However, Buchu's bear hug was different. His method of killing was not strangling. His arms were only used to hold the target in place. His method of killing was to expand his body. As long as his opponent's body was wrapped in his arms, his opponent would be pulled out of shape by the expansion and contraction of his Dharma form. Regardless of whether it was a swordsman or a Dharma cultivator, they did not have the ability to control their body like a physique cultivator. When he expanded to over 100 feet, his opponent would also be stretched to over 100 feet. How would they survive? Lu Xiaoyi had already noticed the teleportation ability that came with the form of illusion and reality. With his keen senses, he had already realized that this could become a method for body cultivators to engage in close combat, so he had already prepared for it. Of the 3 flying swords, he had always placed hidden fragrance at the outermost edge, just for this moment. Almost at the same time as his opponent teleported, Lu Xiaoyi activated the Heavenly Sword Ruler. Just as his opponent's arms were about to close in on him, he escaped and appeared at Buchu's original position. The distance between the two did not change. This was already the maximum teleportation distance of the Heavenly Sword Ruler. The attack was still the same, but the 2 of them had swapped positions. This was the first time that Lu Xiaoyi admitted defeat in close combat since he entered Dao. He had a premonition that if he did not break the form of illusion and reality of a physique cultivator, even if he waved his sword for hundreds of years, he would only be able to slash at his opponent's illusory form. He was not weak in a mid-range mutual attack. A single crucifix was not enough to pose a threat to him. He also did not intend to use his speed to widen the distance between them and make it impossible for his opponent to reach him. This was because his opponent's mysterious form of illusion and reality could allow him to move a few hundred feet forward under any circumstances. Rather than that, it was better to fight at a distance of 3,000 or 4,000 feet. His control of the flying swords would be easier. Bu Chu's expression was indifferent. It was as if every time the illusionary image was cut, it had nothing to do with him. However, this was not a divine ability that could be casually used. Every time the illusionary image appeared, it was as if a layer of his soul, bones, and flesh was being scraped off. The pain was unbearable even for a cultivator. He could do it because of the unimaginable 100 years of bitter cultivation. It was the severing of his own nerves and humanity. He had already lost something that a human should have. The elders in the sect said that he was a little obsessed, but he did not care. If you wanted to gain more, you had to lose more. How could there be an easy way to be immortal in the cultivation world? He had long understood this truth. Therefore, the sect did not approve of him trying to enter the ranking list. In fact, they were afraid that once his secret was known, he would lose face for the sect. What was the result? Did they have to rely on him at the crucial moment? Could others do it? Including the two top 100 figures in the sect? Everyone was guessing what his other divine senses were. Under normal circumstances, it was normal for an outstanding foundation-building body cultivator to comprehend 4 or 5 effective divine senses. In history, the marching sect's record of comprehending divine senses was 9, but he was different. He only had 3 divine senses, and they were all already used: illusory form, bear hug, and cross strangle. But he still relied on these 3 divine senses to stand at the peak of the foundation building group. This was because his divine senses were different from others. They were divine senses of a deeper and higher level. Illusory form seemed to be a divine sense, but in fact, it contained 3 abilities. Illusory form substitution was the basic ability. Instant movement was an expanded ability, and finally, illusory form combination was the ultimate ability. Therefore, although it seemed to be a divine sense, it was actually 3 divine senses. The bear hug was a single divine sense, but its power was extraordinary. In Bu Chu's impression, no one had been able to escape from his bear hug, including his fellow body cultivator brothers. The name bear hug was very misleading. It was actually a body-shaping technique that increased and decreased the size of the body. When he wrapped his arms around his opponent, it would produce a mysterious effect, and his opponent would be on the same level as him. This was the essence of the bear hug. It did not cause any harm. The problem was that when the body cultivator expanded or shrunk his body through his dharma form, the person he was hugging would also change their appearance and characteristics. For body cultivators, it was normal for their bodies to expand or shrink several times. Their cultivation was based on such changes in their dharma form. But the opponent in his arms would not feel the same way. For example, Lu Xiaoyi's body technique was the purple star body, which had a certain degree of toughness. But if his 6-foot height was instantly stretched to 10 feet and then compressed to 1 or 2 feet, it was easy to imagine what would happen to him. A piece of meat. This was an unbreakable divine sense, as long as he hugged his opponent. But such a sure-kill divine sense had its own harsh conditions. You had to get close to your opponent first, so that the opponent could not escape. Just like now, after several attempts, he realized that he could not get within a few feet of this vigilant swordsman using normal methods. Since that was the case, he only had one last move left. The final state of the illusion form fusion. But to use the illusion form fusion, there was an extremely harsh precondition. For example, at his current level, he had to exhaust his illusion form to the very end. In other words, he could only enter the illusion form fusion state when he could no longer use his illusion form fusion state. This was the mysterious restriction of the mysterious power. If it could be as simple as waving his fist, then it would not be mysterious at all. More power usually meant more effort and stricter conditions. This was the reason why he had been allowing his opponent to kill him, and why he kept revealing his illusion form. Firstly, he had no choice, and secondly, he had other plans. Chapter 453. Every spectator felt that the battle was leaning towards the swordsman's advantage. Body cultivators' defensive divine arts were unparalleled in the foundation establishment stage, but their offensive divine arts were lacking. It was a pity that no matter how thick their tortoise shell was, they would not be able to withstand the swordsman's relentless attacks. The balance between offense and defense had always been the principle of a cultivator's battle. Even the crazy swordsman had his own defensive techniques. 80% offense and 2% defense. One could survive in the cultivation world, but 80% defense and 2% offense? This doesn't make sense. As far as I know, this man is the #1 foundation establishment cultivator in the marching sect. His offensive power cannot be limited to this level. Or is he waiting for an opportunity to strike? Three Purities expressed his confusion. He knew the difference between illusion and reality, but he did not know its ultimate form. This was a body cultivator's secret. How could an outsider know about it? I feel that the more it's like this, the more it proves that Buqian is scheming something big. He must be waiting for an opportunity, the last chance to turn the tables. I think the swordsman is in trouble. Daoist Jia Lanxiao expressed his opinion. Senior brother Wu Shangyu sighed. We're guessing here, but we don't know much about the trump cards of both sides. The swordsman has 4 flying swords, but their overall power does not seem to be fully unleashed. 4 flying swords at the same time are not as stunning as the first one. Is it because he can't understand the difference between illusion and reality? Or is there something else? Body cultivators only have 3 divine arts, and one of them can't be used. The strongest body cultivator in the marching sect only has 3 divine arts? What is he waiting for? Although the mystery is unfathomable, it can't be used without limit. If he doesn't counterattack now, is he going to save it for the final moment? If that's the case, if he doesn't succeed, only death awaits him. I can't guess. They were indeed insightful and came from a big sect. However, they could not come to a conclusion about the sword vein, which was not their specialty. In comparison, Smokey was more confident. She did not know anything else, but she knew that this guy's offensive power was not at all in this battle. I wonder if it's because my opponent is immortal? However, there was one thing that mattered. This fellow had always planned meticulously when fighting with others. There was no possibility of him being tricked by others. The key was, how would he make use of his opponent's trap? She was accompanied by a dozen or so swordsmen. They were all swordsmen from the 3 major sword sections. They had come here by chance and were fortunate enough to witness the glory of the sword vein from the very beginning. A swordsman from Weijin Mountain asked worriedly, "Will the leader be all right? Why do I feel uneasy when I have the upper hand?" Yin Chen whispered, "He'll be fine. He's holding it in." Smoky Ash was wrong. The reason why Lu Xiaoyi hadn't used all his attacking tactics was because he wasn't sure if he could deliver a fatal blow. He had an idea, but he wasn't sure yet. This was because his countermeasure was the luck-severing flying sword that he had just mastered. However, this was the last sword spirit that he had refined in the Peacock Palace. It had been less than 10 years since it became a spirit. Its foundation was shallow, and it had not experienced any actual combat. Furthermore, he wasn't sure what the so-called luck-severing was. He wasn't sure if it included the mysteries of the body cultivator. He was more inclined to exhaust the mysteries of the body cultivator first. This would undoubtedly be safer. However, this choice was wrong in the current situation. This was because he might allow his opponent to land a fatal blow. From this point of view, Lu Xiaoyi still lacked the mentality of a true gambler. He also lacked the ruthlessness to kill his opponent's ultimate move. If he didn't use the method but waited, he would be wasting his opportunity. However, he was still Lu Xiaoyi, not the swordsman Lu Xiaoyi. Even if he had some inexplicable battle instincts, he still needed to accumulate them. There was nothing that could be obtained without hard work. Buchu continued to use the expansion ability of the form of illusion and reality to chase after Lu Xiaoyi's figure through continuous teleportation. This was a method of trying to get something out of him. What if the sword cultivator made a mistake and he didn't need to use the ultimate ability of the form of illusion and reality? Regrettably, the swordsman's control of the distance was perfect. He maintained a distance of 300 feet from Buchu and didn't give him any opportunities. Buchu was secretly investigating the mysteries. He knew that he could only maintain his form of illusion for one last time. Thus, he didn't advance and instead retreated. He acted as if he was powerless and was about to retreat. Lu Xiaoyi subconsciously chased after him with his flying sword. This had already become an instinct. He didn't have the time to think about why his opponent was doing this. With this thought in mind, his flying sword went back and forth. For a swordsman, as long as his opponent was within the range of his flying sword, there was no need to stop killing. This was the safest method. In fact, it was also the only choice for a Foundation establishment swordsman. They couldn't withdraw their swords with telekinesis. That required a higher level of control. The Big Dipper finally hit Buchu's body as he wished. This time, there was no illusion. The sword chi of the Big Dipper exploded in Buchu's body. At the same time, Buchu's form of illusion was completed. With the guidance of the Big Dipper flying sword, Buchu firmly locked onto Lu Xiaoyi's position. Then the two apparitions, one illusion and one illusion, disappeared together with the Big Dipper flying sword. In the next moment, the illusion and reality merged into one beside Lu Xiaoyi and rapidly expanded. He wrapped his arms around Lu Xiaoyi and hugged him. Because the distance was too close, Lu Xiaoyi was disturbed by his opponent's chi and could no longer use the heavenly sword ruler. This was the result of not understanding the opponent's skill. If Lu Xiaoyi had discovered the abnormality and reacted quickly, he might not have been so close to the Big Dipper. However, he was not a body cultivator, and he would never be able to figure out the secret of every opponent's trump card. When Buchu's body expanded and formed a chi control circle, Lu Xiaoyi knew that he couldn't escape. At this time, he could only give up his fantasy and face the close combat head-on. He did two things. First, he threw out the Luck Cutter flying sword. At the same time, he held the long sword in his hand and attacked instead of retreating. Buchu didn't care at all. It was not easy to get such an opportunity. How could he retreat just because his opponent was holding a sword? For his form of illusion, he could withstand 10 such sword strikes. For him, the most important thing was to surround his opponent and not let him escape. He had achieved his goal. His swollen arms were like iron hoops tightly wrapped around his opponent. Then, he tried to control his form of illusion to grow. However, his form of illusion, which he had been able to use freely since he started cultivating, lost its response. In the next moment, the majestic sword chi exploded in his body. His body, which he was once proud of, could no longer withstand the sharpness of the swordsman after losing its mysteriousness in the blood. Lu Xiaoyi took out a stick of sugar-coated haws. Chapter 454. P.S. Thank you to the 6 Alliance Masters for your support. Sloth is giving you a free chapter. The changes in the sky were both within the expectations of the spectators and outside of their expectations. The spectators with limited abilities were expected. Since the swordsmen had been suppressing the body cultivators, there was nothing new about the swordsmen winning in the end. What was unexpected were the truly knowledgeable spectators. They could see that Buchu's final attack was unpredictable. But what was even more shocking was that even with such an exquisite combination of attacks, the swordsman still managed to make the first move. Being able to make the most accurate choice in a split second was the most important aspect of judging a cultivator's battle ability. In this sense, this sugar-coated hawthorn had inherited the excellent battle traditions of the Xianyuan swordsman. It was terrifying. Daoist Xia, junior brother Hu, and senior brother Yu had sorrowful expressions as they slowly walked to where the body cultivators of the March sect were gathered. They didn't seem to notice the hostile gazes of the body cultivators, as if their hearts and minds were already immersed in grief. Daoist Xiaomornt. Daoist Buchu. Your soul has returned. Junior brother, who followed closely behind. Your soul has returned. Not to Yudu. There's no place to test your virtue, leaving you in sorrow. Senior brother, you continued. Your soul has returned, leaving you in a fish's leap. Flowing gold nightmare stone, happy place of Permitha. Viper Jinjin, sealing the fox for 1,000 miles. Yo Bay. Your soul has returned, not to float for long. The body cultivator's wariness dissipated like the wind amidst the sincere condolences. They suddenly felt that the spell cultivators weren't as hateful as before. At least for now, in front of the bloody Xinyuan sword massacre, they were comrades standing in the trenches. The body cultivators felt that they couldn't neglect the representatives of the spell sect who came to offer their condolences. Thus, the two body cultivators in the lead walked over and politely returned the greeting. Daoist Xia sighed. I've been friends with senior brother Buchu for a long time. I know that the March sect has extraordinary people with lofty ambitions. Unfortunately, fate didn't allow us to meet. Today, we're lucky to have parted ways. What a pity, junior martial brother who expressed the same sentiments. Cleaving a mountain, one does not fear heights. Stepping into the sea, one only wishes to go deep. Senior martial brother Buchu was a hero of his generation, an upright hero, but he fell into the hands of a treacherous villain. What can he do? Senior brother, you was filled with righteous indignation. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that although senior brother Buchu seemed to be at a disadvantage, he was actually very far-sighted. He had set up layers upon layers of arrangements for the final strike. It was all part of his strategy. But that swordsman sighed. The three of them put on a show of mourning and didn't stay any longer. They sighed and turned around to leave, causing the two body cultivators to feel an unbearable itch in their hearts. The last supreme technique cultivator obviously had something to say, but he didn't say it clearly, causing the two of them to feel anxious and helpless. In terms of experience in dealing with swordsmen, none of the orthodoxies in the fifth ring world could compare to the Dharma lineage. This was especially true for the Wushang three pure ones. They were insightful to begin with, had a deep foundation, and had countless battle records. Therefore, it was not surprising that they were able to discern something. The two body cultivators exchanged glances, already understanding each other's intentions. They came here with the three of them as the leaders. Two of them were deputy generals, while Buchu was the main general. In the end, their main general had passed away, and of the two deputy generals, one was defeated. The other didn't even fight. How were they going to explain this when they returned? Therefore, as long as there was still a chance to turn the tables, they couldn't miss it. The two of them followed. Senior martial brothers, may I have a word with you? The three old Dharma ruffians were shocked. They hurriedly said that they didn't dare to disturb the March sect's normal morning ceremony. After several rejections, they reluctantly stopped in their tracks, as if they were drawing a clear line between themselves and the March sect's internal affairs. This made the two body cultivators even more anxious. The body cultivator who had failed asked, Senior martial brother, you seem to have left something unsaid. May I know what senior martial brother saw in the battle? Senior martial brother, Buchu has passed away. We are eager for revenge, so we need to consider all the clues. Senior martial brothers, please give us some pointers on the account that we share a common enemy. Senior martial brother, you shook his head like a rattle drum. He has passed away, so we should do our best for him. Forgive me for being blunt, but your minds are unstable now, and your breathing is unstable. This isn't a good time for revenge. Don't add new hatred to the old grudges before settling them. That would be a great sin. Junior martial brother, who patted his chest. As for revenge, you two fellow Taoists don't have to worry. Just wait and see. If it's fast, it'll take half a month, and if it's slow, it'll take more than a month. There will definitely be elites from our Dharma lineage here. That sword butcher won't be able to jump around for more than a few days. Let him be arrogant for a few more days. There will be a time when he'll be defeated. When that time comes, we'll come again to help fellow Taoist Bu Chu settle his soul. Taoist Xia also advised, body cultivators have already done what you should. Leave the rest to our Dharma lineage. As for the secrets during the battle, if we really reveal them, won't we be labeled as cowards? This matter concerns a cultivator's reputation, so we can't speak carelessly. The other body cultivator who didn't participate in the battle cried out in grief. Senior Marshal Brother Bu Chu and I were as close as brothers, and his kindness was as heavy as a mountain. This time, he died, but we don't even know the most basic details. How can we repay him before the incense sticks are burnt? Fellow Taoists, even if you don't give us face for senior brother's sake, could it be that you can't send him a message to calm his soul? Hearing the two mention the dead Bu Chu, the three old Dharma ruffians had no choice but to sigh deeply. Senior Marshal Brother Yu hesitated for a moment, as if there were countless struggles in his heart. Finally, he made up his mind. Fine. Since we're here to calm fellow Taoist Bu Chu's soul, then we'll make an analysis and judgment of the cause of fellow Taoist Bu Chu's defeat in the end. We can't guarantee that it'll be accurate. It's just one no, 3 words. You don't have to take it too seriously. He paused, seemingly still in a difficult position. Finally, he said, fellow Taoist Bu Chu's plan was excellent. In the end, he succeeded in fixing the battle circle around him. But why didn't the final divine ability work? Instead, he was killed by the sword gourd. Our sects once studied Xuanyuan's internal and external sword techniques, and happened to know of a secret technique in the external sword lineage. It's called the divine engulfing technique. It's a technique that can perish together with the enemy in a critical situation. Its specific effect is to convert all mental energy into a temporary mysterious slash through the divine engulfing technique. It's specifically used to kill mysterious people. This technique is most likely used by body cultivators like you. The might of this technique is unfathomable, but the price to pay is also huge. Because it's a technique of mutual destruction, regardless of the other effects, a cultivator's mental energy will be rapidly drained. He will temporarily become a half-cripple with only magic power and no mental energy. He will need to recover for a few hours to a few days before he can regain his mental energy. Therefore, it's a pity that fellow Taoist Bu Chu didn't make it through the final stage. If he wasn't in a hurry to kill the thief and took the initiative to defend himself, the swordsman would be nothing more than an inanimate object after that, a cultivator with only magic power and no mental energy. Apart from wielding a sword at close range, what other combat ability does he have? If his flying sword can't even reach 10 feet, what combat ability does he have? Chapter 455. The two body cultivators immediately understood the underlying meaning. In other words, even though this sword gourd was pretending to be calm, it was very likely that he was just a paper tiger pretending to scare people. If someone really challenged him, wouldn't he be exposed immediately? If the swordsman lost the support of his mental strength, it meant that he had no aim. It meant that he was just a live target. The three old Dharma ruffians saw that they had already achieved their goal. If they spoke too much, it would only increase the body cultivator's suspicions. They might as well stop before going too far and leave some leeway for their imagination to run wild. Thus, they floated away. Before they left, Senior Brother Yu reminded them, there are countless secret techniques in the cultivation world. Even in our own sect, we don't know how many secret techniques there are, not to mention us Dharma Meridian cultivators talking about the sword vein. But it doesn't matter. Anyway, we're just trying to comfort fellow Taoist Bu. Whether it's accurate or not is just a thought. Don't take it seriously and blindly follow it. As the two body cultivators watched the Dharma cultivators leave, they felt as if their hearts were on fire. The body cultivator who had already fought before was still a little hesitant. Senior Brother Chu Sheng, do you think they're telling the truth? Are they good or evil? Senior Brother Chu Sheng narrowed his eyes. How can I be 100% sure about this? When body cultivators fight, I'll fight if I'm 30% sure. If I'm 50% sure, I won't back down. Then do you think that the swordsman, who isn't good at being mysterious, can escape unscathed by Senior Brother Boo's mysterious technique? The body cultivator shook his head. No, I can't think of any normal way for a swordsman to avoid this. Not to mention a swordsman, even a Dharma cultivator with many tricks up his sleeve, might not have this ability. Chu Sheng gritted his teeth and pointed at the top of the fish. Look at that swordsman. Ever since he stabbed his sword into the fish, he's been sitting cross-legged in concentration, keeping his sword in his case. But now, he's deliberately showing a flying sword above his head. What's the reason? The body cultivator seemed to understand. Senior brother, are you saying that he's trying to hide something? Usually, when he's full of energy, he hides his sword in his case. Now that he's exhausted, he shows it to the outside world. Is he trying to show the outside world that he's unharmed? The ferocious glint in Chu Sheng's eyes grew brighter and brighter. It was said that swordsmen were prone to gambling during battles, but Chu Sheng's physical cultivation was no weaker than theirs. In terms of opportunity and reward, it was worth it. Cowards can only struggle bitterly in their timidity, while those who achieve great things take large strides forward bravely. He believed that if he was able to overcome this barrier, then no matter if it was in terms of strength or Dao heart, he would be able to break through his current bottleneck. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The key point was that no one was competing with him. If you don't take what the heavens give you, you will be punished. Lu Xiaoyi was reflecting on the gains and losses of this battle. This was a good habit. Only by humbly summarizing experience and lessons could one continue to make progress on the path of cultivation. His battle with Buchu was undoubtedly very successful in the eyes of others, but he knew his own situation very well. Originally, he didn't need to put himself in an unknown danger. This was an unnecessary risk and did not conform to the core nature of a swordsman's control over the course of a battle. What if his reaction was slower than his opponent's divine ability at the last moment? What if his opponent didn't want to use the growth of his Dharma form to decide the outcome, but used a more direct divine ability, such as that cross twist? Would he still have time to finish unsheathing his chop luck and counterattack with his sword? At such a close distance, if Buchu didn't want to kill him and only wanted to injure him, then a simple cross twist would be more direct, and his flying sword wouldn't have any space to block it. This time, his opponent made a mistake at the last moment, but you can't expect the next one to do the same. In the art of war, it was said that those who were good at fighting had no illustrious achievements. This was a true military master. In fact, it was very rare for a person to use methods that were outnumbered, outlandish, and outlandish. When you indulged in the thrill of turning the tables in a desperate situation, you had already gone astray, and in the end, you would lose your life on the wrong path. A true battle should be about using one's own strength, fair and square, and not giving the opponent any chance to defeat him. Controlling the entire battle in one's own hands, making the opponent move according to one's own rhythm, and not even giving the opponent a chance to use their ultimate skills. This was a true battle master. Specifically in the battle just now, it should be about unleashing the full power of several flying swords, attacking wildly, forcing the opponent into a passive state where he constantly revealed his illusory form, and then using the chop luck attack. He hesitated, so he had no choice but to go all out. Originally, he didn't need to do this, and he even injured the Big Dipper sword spirit. In Buchu's last combination of illusory and reality, he accurately located Lu Xiaoyi by injuring his own Big Dipper sword spirit, even though Lu Xiaoyi had already used the heaven-measuring sword ruler at that time. Because of the inseparable connection between him and the Big Dipper sword spirit, his position was tracked by a mysterious force. During this process, the Big Dipper sword spirit resisted and struggled. But after all, it was one of the last 2 sword spirits to appear among Lu Xiaoyi's 6 sword spirits, and its abilities were very limited. If it had been the Four Seasons or Ju City, Buchu might not have been able to achieve his goal of mysterious positioning. Although the battle was short, It had taught Lu Xiaoyi a lot of things. For example, he couldn't relax when facing his opponent's pressure. For example, he couldn't fight his opponent to the end. For example, when using his flying sword, he had to be careful of his weak sword spirit being injured by his opponent. The Big Dipper flying sword floated above his head, and he didn't rush to put it back into the sword case to nurture it. Instead, he wanted to see if it still had the ability to fight when it was unsheathed. What he didn't expect was that his actions would actually cause some people to suspect that he was up to no good. A figure flew towards him, causing the spectators to cheer loudly. It was for unyielding. It was for the Tao. It was for fearlessness. I should be more determined, more confident. Lu Xiaoyi was still reflecting, seemingly indifferent to the opponent coming from afar. The ideal situation should be like this. Actually, I've already established a system, but I still have some misgivings about the top level of 5-ring foundation establishment. 3 flying swords flew out in succession. The 4 seasons were in charge of clearing the path and attacking the defense. The luck cutter was in the middle, responsible for cutting off the mystery of the body cultivator's divine ability. The Jew City was in the back as the final decisive force. The luck cutter sword spirit was very important in my system. In the future, I'll get a few more similar flying swords. There were too many indescribable things in the cultivation world, and the luck cutter couldn't cover everything. The 4 seasons began their assault. The powerful penetrating force almost instantly crushed his rising confidence. He knew he had lost the bet. Should he leave in a hurry? Or should he spill his blood? Actually, he didn't have a choice. At this distance, he couldn't outrun the flying swords. The 4 seasons' first attack broke through his so-called indestructible body cultivator defense, and later on, it was a bit unclear which of the second and third flying swords contributed. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. His reflection was correct, but this time, he had used too much strength. Chapter 456. Fish Leaping Cliff fell into a momentary silence. It wasn't just the swordsman, but also the 1,000 or so people who were trying to stop him. However, because of Lu Xiaoyi's unyielding attitude, he successfully turned these people into bystanders. After the initial disagreement and presumptuous judgment, the spectators realized that they had to face reality. No matter what, this swordsman at least had the strength to stab a sword. His position on the leaderboard was well-deserved. Among those with 5 rings, the number of people who could truly defeat this swordsman could be counted on one hand. Under such a premise of understanding, many of the delusional thoughts of looting a burning house and profiting from it were extinguished. Lu Xiaoyi began to look forward to it. When he first came here, he wished he didn't know about all the foundation establishment cultivators with 5 rings. But now, he was looking forward to the arrival of the strong. He finally understood the meaning of stabbing a sword. It wasn't for the so-called number 1, but for his own sword heart. Swordsmen could only grow in battle, especially when you didn't want to go with the flow. He needed a stage to meet all the heroes in the world. He needed countless sword-sharpening stones to polish himself. When he stepped on this stage, he was destined to advance on a path with no retreat. Fame didn't matter, but increasing his strength was inevitable. The most important thing was that he would comprehend his own things in the process. And these things were extremely important in the process of forming his gold core. This kind of experience couldn't be compared to 10 or 100 years of bitter seclusion. Growth was imperceptible. Several months later, the area around Fish Leaping Cliff began to be packed with people. The main forces of the busybodies began to arrive one after another. 1,000 years later, this place became a sea of joy for foundation establishment cultivators. The last time this kind of challenge happened was 1,000 years ago, but it was a short and comical farce. A cultivator stabbed a sword into Fish Leaping Cliff. By the time everyone arrived, he had already been killed at the top of the cliff. They didn't even know who killed him. It was a strong start but weak finish, a start but no end. This time it was different. The strength of the swordsman had already been recognized by all the foundation establishment cultivators. Those who didn't have any strength and rashly went up would be criticized for not knowing their own limits. The number of cultivators was already more than 10,000, and they were all gathered in groups. More than 1,000 swordsmen had come. This was already a large number. After all, to come here, one had to cross the Wolf Ridge alone. Without a certain level of cultivation, it was impossible to do so. In this aspect, no cultivator would bring their junior brothers and sisters here to gain experience, because there was a possibility of fighting. If you brought someone with a low level of cultivation here, they might to die too. A tall banner was raised, and on it were a few big words written by the ignorant and incompetent Yin Bo, my sword, therefore I exist. The even larger group of magic cultivators on the opposite side also raised their banners. No heaven, no heaven. The body cultivators were unyielding to the body. To my body hides the mustard seed, see my heaven and earth the universe. Regardless of the final outcome, this was something that could not be taken lightly. The challenges to Lu Xiaoyi also began to get on track. They basically maintained the rhythm of one challenge every few days. Under the watchful eyes of tens of thousands of people, and under the fierce gazes of the large group of swordsmen, of course, there was no possibility of continuous challenges. Under normal circumstances, resting for a few hours was the minimum. However, in order to show their noble character and unquestionable integrity, the cultivators who challenged him would control the rest time to within a day. This wasn't completely pretending to be noble. For most cultivators who had their own goals and their own pride, they weren't willing to take advantage of continuous battles for no reason. This was the self-cultivation of cultivators. After all, it was different from the Jianghu fights of the mortal world. The experts on the ranking list, the reclusive mutants, the stunning talents of the small sects, the self-conceited rogue cultivators, the demon cultivators with extraordinary talents, and so on. They were usually hidden in various places and didn't reveal themselves. Now, they all came out and treated the battle with the Xianyuan swordsman as a touchstone. In such frequent battles, Lu Xiaoyi also changed his vicious attacks and didn't hold back. He still didn't hold back in his first attack. If he still couldn't kill, he wouldn't seek to kill after getting injured. This was because he could sense that many of these people were truly here for a life and death battle. It didn't involve too much. He needed to leave a way out for others, and at the same time, leave some leeway for himself. If this kind of battle attracted new enemies for the sect, it wouldn't be appropriate. In these 5 years, the 33rd ranked Wanjing sect cultivator, Taoist Qianjin, and the 27th ranked Heaven Hook set off a frenzy of challenges from the ranking list cultivators. In these 5 years, there were countless cultivators who went up. Almost half of the top 10 cultivators and below were defeated. Everyone finally realized a fact. Based on individual strength alone, this swordsman already had the ability to be in the top 3. If they didn't gather all their forces to target him, the success rate of this sword attack would be more than half. This was a slap to the face of the Dharma lineage. They could no longer sit back and do nothing. Under the circumstances where individual strength was useless, they began to seek the strength of a group. The enemies didn't rush up together. Cultivators weren't so shameless. Their so-called strength of a group referred to collecting all the personal information of the Candied Hawthorn, including his fighting style, interests, cultivation habits, and so on. They hoped to find a fatal weakness from it. For the cultivators of the sect who were preparing to challenge the sect, they opened up the inner treasury and released the restrictions on their usage. This included the very magical dimensional lowering spiritual weapon. To be able to share battle resources, information, tactical arrangements, and so on, they really took Lu Xiaoyi seriously. This wasn't against the rules. In fact, the 6 successful sword stabbers in history had all received similar treatment. Among them, the one who played the craziest was the sword vein. Therefore, when one of their own stabbed a sword this time, and the Dharma lineage cultivators also treated him in the same way, they had nothing to say. If you want to wear a crown, you must bear its weight. However, such an organized attack required coordination and cooperation. There were even some who didn't care about this. In short, they needed time and communication. Then, at a certain time in the future, perhaps a year or 2 or 3 years, they would suddenly launch a frenzy of attacks. Lu Xiaoyi had already received news of this from his companions in Xinyuan. He wasn't afraid. Instead, he was looking forward to it. The undercurrents were gathering, and strength was accumulating. This was just the calm before the storm. On this point, the thousands of swordsmen below the fish-leaping cliff couldn't help him. This was his battle alone. It was even difficult for the swordsmen to gather accurate information about the gathered cultivators. They were too spread out, and there were too many restrictions. Only at times like this could one see the deep foundation of the Dharma lineage in the fifth ring. This wasn't a battle between cultivators. Therefore, even some of the Dharma lineages who were on good terms with Xinyuan wouldn't help Xinyuan at this time. What they preferred was to shoot the bird that stood out first. As for Lu Xiaoyi, under the spotlight of the fifth ring, everyone could see through him. There wasn't a trace of secrecy. This was the price of standing in the limelight. Chapter 457. In fact, Lu Xiaoyi really didn't have the time to consider the possibility of an organized attack in the future. Even those mavericks were enough to make him suffer. Never underestimate others, and never think that the heavenly Tao was set up for you. When the heavens open a door for you, it might also open a window for others. Just like this cultivator from a small sect in front of him. His sect was so small that Lu Xiaoyi had never heard of it, but his cultivation and strength were really impressive. One of Lu Xiaoyi's specialties was his long-range attacks. Because his flying sword had a spirit, his shooting range exceeded almost 99% of the cultivators. Coupled with his impressive starlight escape technique and his crazy sword control philosophy, many powerful opponents were crippled by him. They couldn't use their offensive abilities, but their defensive methods were useless. But the cultivator he met today was one of those rare exceptions. It turned his long-range attacks into short-range attacks. He went from not being able to fight back to not being able to do anything when others beat him up. This person's name was Cui Chu. His first special characteristic was the strange beast he was riding on. This was a rare Foundation establishment strange beast that had long gone extinct in the fifth ring. No one knew where this guy got it from, but just in terms of speed and agility, this strange beast's flying ability was far above that of humans. This was also a special characteristic of flying strange beasts. Just this point alone made Lu Xiaoyi's sword control lose most of its effectiveness in front of him. He couldn't even run as fast as the strange beast. So what was there to control? As for whether this thing had any special magical powers, Lu Xiaoyi didn't know. But in his opinion, he had to plan and prepare for powerful magical powers. Cui Chu's second special characteristic was that he had a bow. Lu Xiaoyi also had a bow, but it was the treasure of the Qi cultivators on the mother planet. In his eyes, it was trash. It had always been on the shelf, and rarely had anyone ask about it. In the cultivation world, there were two types of weapons that could improve a cultivator's combat ability in a certain aspect. One was amplification, and the other was range. As the name implied, amplification was to increase the power of a cultivator's spell techniques, while range amplification was to extend the effective range of a spell technique. However, everything had a fixed number. In the world of cultivation, there was also the principle of conservation of energy. If a cultivator improved in one aspect during battle, they would definitely be limited in another aspect. There was no exception. For example, the increase in speed and range. They could indeed improve a cultivator's ability to cast spells, but they did not include the mysterious things like intent, aura, spirit, and other mysterious things. They could only increase the basic power of a cultivator. This kind of artifact could be said to be a double-edged sword for cultivators. While improving their abilities, they would also lose a lot of things that were inconspicuous in the Foundation establishment stage, and that was the cultivator's constant exploration in mysterious directions. This was the reason why the big sects did not promote this kind of artifact, because as the realm increased, the Tao state mystery and spirit would become more and more important. If you were always obsessed with things that increased your basic attributes, you would lose the fundamental perception of the Tao. You would gain instant benefits, but lose the future. This was a balance. How to improve one's current combat ability while taking into account one's own future development. This was the choice that every low-level cultivator would make. The disciples of the big sects would give up this short-sighted method under the guidance of their masters, but the small sects and individual cultivators would rely on it for survival. The environment was different, and the starting point was different, so the choice was different. Chui Chu's bow was a typical range amplification artifact. Its characteristics were that it had a long range of more than 10,000 feet and was very powerful. It used attribute arrows and could be automatically recovered. Of course, the recovery could not be like a flying sword that could be sent out at will. Instead, it was a process of scattering, changing direction, and finally returning to the cultivator's quiver. To Lu Xiaoyi, this was a brand new way of fighting, and he needed a brand new way to deal with it. After a few leaps, he realized that even with his current abnormal escapability, he was still no match for that feathered beast. This was nothing to be ashamed of. Humans could not compete with birds in flying, fish in swimming, and pangolins in burrowing. At the very least, cultivators of lower realms could not compete with them. Unable to reach long range, and with his short legs, Lu Xiaoyi's only strategy was to stay as still as a mountain. He set his sights on his opponent's arrows. For every arrow released by Chui Chu, he would destroy it. He wanted to see if his opponent had more arrows, or if he had more transcendence energy. The attacks of the bow were divided into physical arrows and transcendence energy arrows. This was similar to the swordsman's internal and external swords. As long as the cultivator had enough transcendence energy, there would be an endless supply of transcendence energy arrows. But there was a limit to physical arrows, especially arrows like Chui Chu's. They had attribute bonuses, automatic recovery, precious materials, and complicated crafting. How many could he store? 100? 1,000? Although he was being rubbed against and enjoyed the invasion of different attributes, such as metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, ice, and so on, Lu Xiaoyi had made up his mind to destroy the arrows. He would place the arrows within a range of 3,000 feet before attacking. Basically, he would be able to ensure that the arrows would not return. Apart from the unsightly scene, his response was flawless. Streams of light flashed in the sky, crisscrossing. Mother and child arrows, 3 talents arrows, 4 symbols arrows, all the way to 9 stars consecutive arrows. Each arrow had different attributes of the 5 elements, and they were combined and resonated with each other from afar. The power and variations of long-range archery were displayed to the fullest. He had fully demonstrated his extraordinary talent in the 5 elements arts. With this skill, Chui Chu had never lost a battle. At most, he would run far away when he was no match for his opponent. He would always leave his opponent badly battered, unable to advance or retreat, and run for his life. It was just that he had always kept a low profile and rarely fought in public, so no one knew. But privately, he believed that he could actually enter the top 10 of the 5-Ring Foundation establishment ranking. Now that he was at the age where he should take another step forward, he wanted to truly understand what level his abilities belonged to among the 5-Ring Foundation establishment cultivators before he tried to break through to the Jindan realm. This was the best opportunity to prove himself, so he came. Just like in his previous battles, this infamous Xianyuan swordsman who had persisted for 5 years on the fish-leaping cliff had no choice but to yield to his attacks. He couldn't even fight back. But after a moment, he found himself in a dilemma. His problem was that although his arrows had a long range and had many variations, his arrows lacked the ability to determine the outcome of a battle with a single strike. If he encountered other cultivators, he could use the variations of his archery combination to make his opponent reveal flaws in their left and right attacks, and then find an opening to break through. But his current opponent was barbarically using a sword against an arrow. In the collision, The difference in strength between his arrows made him feel extremely aggrieved. He finally understood the difference between him and the top cultivators. An attack that had a long range, but no strength, was imperfect. His flaws were infinitely magnified by his opponent's correct response, and he was powerless to do anything about it. He didn't have a good solution. Chapter 458. Choo Choo still had many arrows. That was his secret. This bow and these arrows were all his fortuitous encounters. He did not waste too many resources to make them, but he knew that he should not continue. He had already achieved his goal, so he shouldn't continue to pester them. He had come here to test his own ability, not to drag others down. That was the resentment of the large sects, not something that cultivators from small sects like them should consider. Knowing when to stop was also a state of mind that not everyone could understand. Choo Choo put away the bow, bowed from afar, and left in a clean and efficient manner. Among the countless spectators below the fish-leaping cliff, some cheered, while others booed. It was a chaotic scene. Lu Xiaoyi smiled with satisfaction. He liked opponents who knew when to advance and when to retreat, but there weren't many people like this, especially those who had the goal of their sect, the intention of their power, or the responsibility of their orthodoxy. They made the battle between cultivators infinitely complicated and also forced him to eat candied haws one by one. Why bother? Over the past 5 years, he had been honed by countless fifth-ring experts. Different orthodoxies, different tactics, and different styles had brought his flying sword system to a whole new level. In the beginning, he had favored sneak attacks the most, but now he had countless combinations. He had truly experienced the joy of battle that was unique to sword cultivators. When he came out of the peacock plume space, he was very confident that he could defeat all the heroes in the world with his sword skills. But now, it seemed that he was a little arrogant. If the Dharma and body meridians had started to attack him from the start, he would not have been able to hold on. But now, these precious 5 years had taught him how to fight. In a situation where he was naturally good at sneak attacks, how to be upright and honorable. This was a huge improvement. It allowed him to learn how to fully display his strength in battle. This was something that could not be trained in the peacock plume space alone. Only now did he truly have the strength to fight like a fish leaping with a sword. In the southeastern region, next to the Wolf Ridge, there was a medium-sized sect called the Heron Sect. It had a long history, and it was one of the powers that had participated in the establishment of the Five Rings. If a medium-sized sect wanted to live comfortably in the southeastern region for a long time, it was extremely important to have a relationship with the region master. This was also the key to the survival of many small and medium-sized sects, just like Xuanyuan's position in the western region. The Green Heron sect's entrance was close to Wolf Ridge, and it wasn't far from Fishleap Cliff. It was a place that the cultivators of the southeastern region had to pass through on their way to Fishleap Cliff. Over the years, large groups of cultivators had passed through here, whistling through the air, and it had already become a normal occurrence in this area. However, as time passed, the number of spectators from the past few years had dwindled. Many of those that had rushed over now were experts that had ambitions and intended to display their abilities on Fishleap Cliff. 6 years had already passed, and the true experts were beginning to feel restless. In the dozens of recorded cases of sword stabbing in the Fishleap Cliff, more than half of the cases were experts biding their time, waiting for the sword stabber to make a fool of himself onto the stragglers. One shouldn't underestimate these small sects that didn't belong to any organization. There were always people with amazing talents among them, and when they swarmed up, most of the sword stabbers who overestimated themselves wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Their weaknesses would always be grasped and pulled off the cliff. Therefore, there was actually no need to rush over as soon as they heard that there was a sword stabber at Fishleap Cliff. However, if the sword stabber could hold on for 5 or 6 years like Candied Hawthorn, it meant that their strength had already reached a considerable height. It would be very difficult for scattered attacks to succeed. At that time, an organized force would be required to begin a planned and layered interception. The experts ranked at the top of the 5 rings ranking list would also have to consider when they would arrive. Stabbing a sword was a challenge to the ranking list. It was a challenge to everyone on the ranking list and disregard them. Of course, those ranked outside the top 100 could ignore the matter as it didn't concern them. But those ranked at the top couldn't think like that. A true cultivator wouldn't refuse such a provocation. Therefore, in the first few years after Liu Xiaoyi's sword stabbing, there were many challenges to the top 100, but most of them were stragglers. Now was the time for the major powers to get serious, especially the law branch. It was impossible for them to tolerate a swordsman being so rampant. The Heron sect also had a foundation establishment cultivator ranked at the top of the ranking list. He was ranked 19th, Sandu, and was known for his comprehensive variety of spells. Although he was very close to Fish Leap Cliff, he was very good at manipulating his status. He had been quietly observing the situation until a certain supreme cultivator sent news. Only then did he begin to send talismans to invite people. In reality, he was just a puppet. These days, senior brothers from the southeast region who were close to the supreme cultivator began to gather in front of the Heron sect. Their purpose this time was to solve the problem. After them, there was no longer a barrier to the law branch. There were more than 10 people who came. They were the true elites. Among them, there were 2 experts ranked in the top 10. The 6th was Taoist Shang Xian, and the 9th was Taoist Yin Fa from the Ziyuan Pavilion. The rest were basically all Foundation establishment senior brothers from the major powers. Most of them were from the law branch, followed by a few body cultivators and 1 or 2 unorthodox cultivators. These were all Wu Shang's closest allies in the southeast region. He wouldn't involve those who were far from him. Cultivators paid attention to moderation. Making a big fuss over a sword cultivator wouldn't sound good if word got out. Therefore, even if it was an organized effort to target Wu Shang, on the surface, the initiator would be Heron Sect Sandu, but behind closed doors, the one in charge was still Taoist Shang Xian. Thank you for waiting here. This humble Taoist is late and has delayed everyone's time. I'm really sorry. I hope everyone can forgive me. Shang Xian was very polite. He came from a major sect and had outstanding strength. He was polite and elegant, but he wasn't overbearing. This was the temperament of a major sect. Everyone returned the greeting. A cultivator smiled and asked, Senior Brother Shang Xian, didn't Senior Brother Ran Xian come? Or is there something else? In terms of territory, the southeast region was the largest among the 3 regions of the 5 rings. It was a rich land, unlike the bitter cold of the west region. Arai's land was scattered all over the place and was very suitable for living. Therefore, it had the most sects and the biggest powers. In terms of population alone, the southeast region was close to the combined population of the west region and Arai. Population was the cornerstone of cultivation. On the ranking list, 4 of the top 10 cultivators from the southeast region were from the southeast region. Other than the 6th, Shang Xian, and the 9th, Yin Fa, there was actually the 2nd Taoist Ran Xian and the 5th Tai Zhen Danzi. These 2nd and 5th did not come, but the 6th and 9th came. This was very thought-provoking. Tai Immortal Sect was a very unique sect. It was famous for its thunder techniques in the 5 rings. Its combat strength was very strong. In terms of attack speed, it was the only orthodoxy that could make the swordsman pale in comparison. It was very fierce. However, these thunder cultivators were also very noble. They belonged to the orthodox Taoist sect, but they maintained a kind of independent attitude. They rarely participated in the open and secret fights between the Dharma vein and the sword vein. They were friends with the Supreme, 3 Pure Ones, and Xianyuan. Therefore, it was expected that their senior brother Zhendanzi would not come. Thunder cultivators never felt that they were weaker than the swordsmen. Therefore, they disdained this kind of organized attack. They would rather face the swordsman alone than lose their edge in front of others. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.